Welcome back to the channel. This is Trendy Storm and you are watching second and final part of What If Naruto Left the Village after Forbidden Scroll incident. If you enjoy this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no time, let's start the story.
Baki. Sensei, what's the point of having this meeting in this tiny village in the middle of nowhere? Because Naruto, this tiny village is as close as possible to the borderline of the two countries, replied the Junin. Meeting here puts both sides on neutral ground rather than giving one of them a home field advantage, so to speak. Also, this village doesn't train shinobi, so the threat of potential danger is considered to be lower. Oh, said the blonde. I guess that makes sense. Kankuro complained, still a little irritable from his lack of sleep. What's keeping them? He received little more than Naruto's nod of agreement when he said, they tell us to be here at noon, then they're the ones who are late. In the small town where the soldiers had first learned about the gold 3 weeks prior, the group was presently awaiting the arrival of Kasumi, Kazuya, and the other AIM representatives. It was probably only half as big as AIM, who was much smaller than Suna or Konoha, so there wasn't really anything there. The town hall in the center of the village, where the meeting was to be held, was the only structure that caught the eye as being particularly large. They waited for 5 more minutes before they noticed the two AIM siblings coming their way. Because they were both helping someone else in between them, they were going rather slowly. As they approached the Suna team, they saw that he was a middle-aged man with dark, graying hair who was dressed in a yukata that was dark gray and blue. They examined the man's face even more closely and saw how sickly and haggard it appeared. We apologize for being late, Kasumi said. We can't travel as fast as we'd like to with Masamori Sama in this condition. Whoa, declared the puppeteer. He questioned, you brought him with you? Incredulously. Of course, replied Kasumi. Masamori Sama is the leader of a megacure, after all. How would we look showing up at a meeting with this much importance if he weren't here? Naruto sputtered, but he looks like a corpse. Tamari said, I have to agree with my teammates, with the leader of AIM in that sort of condition, he'll be a prime target for anyone who might try to attack the meeting. No one will harm Masamori Sama, Kazuya glared. Not if you all do your job correctly. That's why we hired you people, remember? A low clearing of Baki's throat caused Naruto and Kankuro's faces to twitch with agitation, but they were forced to hold back their responses. I don't like that guy, complained Naruto. Kankuro retorted, I agree with you, but I can't believe I'm saying it. While I agree with my students that bringing Masamori-san here will be more a hindrance than helpful, we will see to it that he remains unharmed, Baki reassured them. Kazuya was not impressed, but Kasumi nodded her approval. Words hold little meaning. I still believe it was foolhardy of Suna to send us a group of children for something so important. Baki let his lips form a smile of amusement. I admit that they're young, but my students are some of the finest shinobi in all of Suna. Everyone, excluding Gaara, was taken aback by the sudden words of praise. Tamari and Kankuro held their heads slightly higher as a result of the infrequent opportunity to hear their sensei vocally congratulate them. Naruto was positively glowing until Kankuro spoiled the moment by pressing his shoulder against the top of his head. Some of his team are the finest shinobi in Suna, I believe that sensei meant, he said, glancing directly at the blonde. One of us still sucks and just kind of gets in the way of the others. With a growl, Naruto gave the taller boy a sidelong elbow. Don't be so hard on yourself, make up face. Kankuro placed a tight headlock on Naruto's head. It's face paint, you idiot midget. The blonde yelled, ow, let go, damn it, and repeatedly punched Kankuro in the side. Tamari yelled, would you two grow up, but it didn't seem like either boy could hear her. The Rain Nin gazed at the screen in front of them in blankness. Kazuya asked Baki, finest? And Baki just sighed and looked down. They perform well when they need to, he stated. Everyone's attention was drawn to the pathetic looking Masamori by a low moan, and Kasumi and Kazuya exchanged a distressed glance. Let's be on our way, said the girl. We need to get this over with as quickly as we can. After that, the group proceeded to the town hall. During their journey, Naruto and the others noticed that most of the people they encountered would wave, smile, or make other friendly gestures toward Kasumi and Kazuya. The majority of the gestures were returned by Kasumi, but her brother ignored them and continued to look directly ahead. Naruto said, these people all know you, to Kasumi. She gave him a smile. Kazuya and I grew up here. We moved to AIM when we were 12 so we could become shinobi. Baki called out, Uzumaki, drawing the boy's attention. Don't forget what we've gone over the last week in our training. Naruto reassured him, no problem, sensei. A ninja must always remain focused, alert and not allow anything to distract him. Very good, observed the Junin. Just be sure to keep that. Sensei, look! Naruto exclaimed, frantically gesturing behind the elderly man. He pointed, and everyone turned with their weapons out. Temari, who could only make out a few buildings, questioned, What is it, Naruto? Naruto took a step forward while continuing to gesture pointedly at one of the structures. Ramen shop, he exclaimed, unable to contain his saliva. The rest of the group experienced a range of reactions, from glaring at him to hanging their heads in embarrassment, before there was a painful silence. Uzumaki, snarled Baki. What were we just saying about focus? I know, Baki. Sensei. It's just that I haven't eaten a single noodle of ramen in the last 13 days, 18 hours, 50.2 minutes and 35 seconds. I've never gone that long without ramen before, and if I don't eat some soon I'll start going into withdrawal. With a command, let's go, Naruto, Temari grabbed him by the sleeve and dragged him along. Can't we just stop for one bowl? Everyone yelled. No, except for Masamori and Gaara. As Naruto was gradually dragged away until the ramen shop was out of sight, tears welled up in his eyes. He sniffed and said, Wait for me ramen, I'll come back for you. The group reached the meeting hall a short while later. Everyone traveled in silence, save for Masamori's sporadic groan of discomfort, and Naruto had regained his composure and had contented himself with pouting about his lack of ramen. A middle-aged woman stopped them as they entered the hall. She said to the siblings, Kasumi-chan, Kazuya-kun, I hope you've been well? The greeting was, We've been just fine, Izumi-san, Kasumi said. Kazuya grunted what was interpreted as an affirmative. Have the Kusa representatives arrived yet? She inquired. Not yet, though we expect them any moment now. The AIM team led Team Baki into a tiny conference room. The two youthful bodyguards were positioned on either side of Masamori, who was positioned in the middle of the table. As the others arranged themselves around them, Naruto took care to avoid approaching Kazuya any closer than was absolutely required. They waited there for an additional 5 minutes, during which time the general unrest in the room became intolerable until dynamic entry. When a man and a small boy, who were exactly alike except for height, flew into the room, the wooden door exploded inward and almost flew off its hinges. They gave the group thumbs-ups and smiles that would win them 2 awards. The taller man declared with a sense of grandeur, the shinobi of Kusa and Konoha have arrived. When they saw 5 ninja with their weapons out and prepared to attack at the drop of a hat, the 2 men in green continued to blink in shock. Perhaps our grand entrance was a bit misleading, Sensei, Lee said. Tenten punched the boy in the back of the head and yelled, You think, behind them. She hurried to the front and bowed to everyone several times. The long-haired boy beside her lowered his head as well, mumbling some unkind remarks about his male teammates. Sorry, so sorry. They're usually more behaved than this. A roar of laughter came from the corridor as the AIM and Suna Nin slowly lowered their weapons. The portly man remarked, I knew it was a good idea to hire you Konohans. You sure know how to liven things up, ha 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 ha. After entering behind the Konoha team, Takara, Halleck, and 3 other shinobi took seats on the floor across from the other shinobi. Baki didn't experience anything significant until this very moment. Shinobi from Konoha. He turned to face Naruto, but he was nowhere to be seen. He looked around the room, but the boy was nowhere to be seen. 2 of his students shrugged in perplexity as he eyed them. Conversely, Gaara lowered his own gaze to the table in front of him. After raising his eyebrows, Baki carefully stepped forward a few inches before letting his foot touch something soft. The Junin let out a distressed sigh, just wonderful. Before this was all over, he was going to have a terrible headache. For the umpteenth time in his life, Naruto was cursing his bad luck. The universe's gods appeared to take great pleasure in torturing him whenever they could. That any of them had time to do any actual work was a wonder. Imagine that he was hiding beneath a table after receiving his first mission ever, a B-ranked, extremely important mission that could decide the fate of 2 entire nations. In any case, why in the world was Konoha here? How did he wind up sharing a mission with them out of all the missions to all the lands in the world? In the event that they did find him, Baki had previously warned him that Suna would be powerless to stop someone from Konoha from finding Naruto and demanding his return without violating their agreement. When Naruto heard someone from Kusa say, My, Masamori-san, it would seem that you've yet to recover from that strange incident last week. Are you sure it's wise for you to be here? The reply from Kasumi was, Thank you for your concern, Halleck-san, but we'll be making certain that nothing goes wrong this time. Masamori. Sama will be fine. The table jerked with a loud laugh, and Naruto jumped too. I always thought that you were too headstrong for your own good, Masamori. Putting yourself through all of this when you look like death warmed over. I have to say I admire your determination and the will of your men. And women, Takara said with a further chuckle. As everyone finished settling in, there were a few unintelligible murmurs coming from both sides. Although Naruto already wished he could move around a bit to feel a little more at ease, he was compelled to stay put out of concern that even the smallest sound would attract notice. This shouldn't take long, he prayed. He could already feel his leg dozing off. Negotiations between the two factions started after the initial greetings. The members of Suna and Konoha watched passively as Takara, Halleck, Kasumi, and Kazuya attempted to reach a consensus on how to divide the gold, anticipating any odd event that might portend an impending attack. Every few seconds, Tamari and Baki would also glance at the table. As all of this was happening, Hyuga Neji, who was sitting motionless and not revealing anything, calmly turned on his Byakugan and started looking around the room for anything that might be even remotely suspicious. As it happened, he discovered multiple items. However, his attention was focused on specific attendees rather than friending objects like assassins concealed in the ceiling. The boy from Suna with the red hair was the first. Since the boy had entered the room, Neji had been suspicious of the lethal aura he exuded, but he was still unsure of what to make of this. An enormous amount of chakra was flowing through the boy's body. Additionally, there appeared to be an indistinguishable object lodged in the boy's abdomen, just below the sternum. No matter how hard the prodigy focused, he was unable to see through the obstruction to the tenketsu behind it because of the massive amounts of chakra that seemed to be streaming from it. Another thing was the gourd the boy was carrying. The material inside it, which looked like sand, was also brimming with chakra. He knew that inanimate objects did not contain chakra, so that made no sense at all. Neji reminded herself to watch the boy closely. His eyes then focused on Aim's ill-looking leader. After carefully examining the man's body, he was pleasantly surprised to discover no signs of poison, illnesses, or recent injuries. However, there was undoubtedly a problem with the man. Neji wouldn't have been shocked if he had fallen to the ground at any time due to his extremely low chakra level. The man's chakra wasn't the only one. His heartbeat was deathly weak, his breathing shallow and short, his eyes glassy and unblinking. Its heartbeat could not be more than 20 beats per minute. What on earth had caused this man to become so ill? More significantly, what was sustaining his life? As he considered this, Halleck caught his attention due to his unrestrained vision. Neji discovered an anomaly within the man's body, just like the Suna boy had done previously. Had it simply not existed back in Kusa, or had he missed it? Maybe he hadn't really noticed it at the time because he was too busy trying to locate the hidden shinobi. Halleck's obstruction, however, appeared to be less than solid, in contrast to the boy. It resembled a fog or smoke cloud more than anything else. Though not nearly as much as the other, it too had a respectable amount of chakra surrounding it. The fact that there were so many possible threats in this room and that not even his Byakugan could identify them all bothered and irritated the Hyuga. Then, as he was ready to turn off his Kekkei Genkai, he saw one final thing, which fortunately didn't startle him in the least. Whispering, "Sensei," he made sure to speak as softly as possible so that no one else could hear him. "There's someone under the table." Guy responded in the same way but did not react. "Who is it?" "I don't know. It's a young boy. It looks like he's wearing a Hittite Dotite from Suna. His chakra level looks to be above average, but other than that." Guy scowled as he looked down at the table, but not far enough to look underneath it. Maybe AIM had an assassination plot in mind when she hired Suna. Maybe I ought to. Guy's thoughts came to a sudden halt when everyone's focus shifted to Gaara, the redhead who had been sitting motionless. He had reached up and taken the gourd off his back by its cork. As the sand started to pour out of the enormous container and the three Kusa shinobi shifted to stand in front of a startled Takara, tension ensued. With her teeth clenched, Kazuya demanded, "What the hell are you doing, brat?" Neither did Gaara feel compelled to answer that question, nor did he pay any attention to the other people who were looking at him. Rather, he poured his sand beneath the table. Everyone moved farther away in an attempt to see what was going on after hearing a yelp of shock. Takara was so terrified that her chin was shaking. If this is your idea of a huge pile of shifting sand, its prisoner securely held within, rose slowly into the air, toppling the table abruptly. Everyone was curious to see what the unstable boy was planning, but Gaara's siblings and Sensei were particularly interested. A louder crash indicated that the boy had not stopped at the hallway wall, and they were taken aback when the sand whipped around and threw the person inside through the door. A second hole in the wall was also visible when looking through the opening where the door had been. Everyone's attention returned to Gaara, who remained seated as if nothing had happened. He said, "You may continue," calmly. It seemed like nobody knew how to react to that. Suspicious looks were now flying in all directions, but everyone gradually repositioned themselves, with the exception of Takara, who positioned himself against the wall to avoid approaching Gaara any closer than necessary. With a cautious massage of his temples, Kankuro muttered, "I don't remember missions being such a headache before." Guy scowled once more. The boy might have been an assassin, but if he had been collaborating with them, why had Suna disposed of him? Would the redhead have realized they were aware of his presence? Or maybe it had been a disguised individual attempting to pass it off as Suna and Aim's work. Whispering, Lee said, "Guy. Sensei." Guy nodded silently and engaged the boy in an unspoken dialogue. "Go," he said. Lee stood up instantly, bowed briefly to the others, and then jumped out of the room through the opening created by Naruto's departure. Tamari felt Baki's hand on her arm and instinctively reached for her fan. He looked at her as if to tell her to remain where she was. With reluctance, she let go of her fan and repositioned herself. Baki whispered, "Have a little faith, Tamari," to her. The boy's been in worse situations than this, after all. "Itai," Naruto groaned as he hauled himself feebly to his feet. If he was not mistaken, his brains were currently leaking out of his ears, and his spine felt like it was in 100 pieces. He wanted to thank Gaara for saving him from that predicament, but he also wanted to start cursing him for what he had done. Still, he complained. He got up, feeling his back pop in protest, but the pain was already beginning to subside. He didn't have to throw me that hard. He looked around, wondering what he should do now that he was outside the building, surrounded by bushes and shrubs. Since he was obviously unable to return inside, it appeared that his only option was to remain there and wait for the meeting to conclude. A voice behind him said, "So you are still here." Naruto took off at a dead run without even bothering to turn around. He knew without seeing who it was that the voice belonged to the strange-looking Konoha kid with the thick eyebrows. "You were quick, adversary," yelled the boy behind him, "but you are not fast enough to escape from me." Hearing his pursuer's footsteps approaching, Naruto grimaced. "Well, lucky for me," he repeated. He turned the corner of the building and made his hand seal instantly, saying, "I don't have to be fast to escape from people." Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Konoha Senpu. The boy in green quickly put a well-placed kick to Naruto's back, snuffing out the third extra poof that had just appeared. The other three Narutos dispersed, running off in various directions, in a panic at having been caught up to so fast. Taking a chance, the boy ran down the one on the right, but he was unsuccessful because that one vanished as well. Lee looked around and saw that the boy and his surviving clone had already vanished from view. He ran back to the building and climbed to the roof in the hopes of seeing some blue and orange movement. He thought he was out of luck a few moments later. He remarked enthusiastically, "You are a worthy adversary, my youthful opponent. The next time we meet, I will make certain that you do not escape." Lee considered jumping back down and going back to the meeting, but changed his mind. He scratched his cheek absently, unsure of what to do. "I have already shown bad manners by leaving in the middle of the meeting for any purpose, and it would be even ruder to go back in while it is still in progress." He said out loud, "Perhaps I should patrol the village. If he was an assassin, then he may try to strike again." A low rumbling cut through his contemplation. "I am starting to wish that I had spent the few precious hours before coming here on eating lunch instead of last-minute training. And that guy. Sensei had woken us up earlier this morning so we would have time to eat breakfast," he said with a sob. "Okay then, I will find a place to eat and at the same time keep a sharp lookout for my adversary. But I cannot be gone long, lest Guy Sensei should start to worry about me. And if I should fail in any way, then I shall do 500 handstand push-ups." Having made up his mind, he jumped off the roof and ran away. Naruto exhaled a sigh of comfort. His Kage Bunshin diversion seemed to have worked. He took one last glance around to be sure, then walked out of the alley between the two buildings he was hiding in. They were all out searching for him, so the child must have given up, or he may have returned to fetch the others. He would be shocked if anyone in Konoha didn't know who and what he was by now, as the boy was certain to have identified him as the demon boy that Konoha had always discussed. He gave a headshake. He had become extremely paranoid over the past few weeks, perhaps for good reason, but still. What comes next? His teammates would no longer be aware of his whereabouts, and he was still unable to return to the meeting. If something went wrong, how was he to know? What if he wasn't present to assist in the event of a real attack? Disappointed, he bowed his head. He couldn't really do anything about it, could he? simply wait for them to find him by sitting around. This was turning out to be a really good first mission. However, as he raised his head again, his mood also improved. He grinned and remarked, "Well, at least I can have fun while I'm waiting for them." He entered the eatery he had inadvertently stopped in front of. He yelled at the man behind the counter, "Hey Oyaji! Give me a bowl of ramen and keep them coming." After 3 minutes, Naruto gazed down at the steaming bowl of noodles in front of him, ecstatic beyond belief. Had he truly been without this for so long? How on earth had he done it? Unfortunately, he realized that he had only enough money for roughly 3 bowls because he had spent most of it on his new outfit. He would have to make them last, really. He exclaimed, "Itadakimasu," and began to eat his priceless food. Before he could resist the urge to gag, he had already swallowed a full mouthful. He dropped the bowl, pushed it violently away from him, and stared at it in horror as his chopsticks broke in two between his fingers. No, he would never disparage the noble name of ramen by linking it to such things. The worst tasting noodle and broth based dish he had ever encountered was that vile monstrosity. In fact, it made the cold soba he had inadvertently consumed back in the Suna hospital appear not only delicious but also something he would have happily consumed forever if this garbage had been the alternative. He called out to the man behind the counter, "Hey old man, what's wrong with this ramen?" The man heaved a heavy sigh instead of becoming angry. "Sorry kid, but that's the best we got for now. If we could actually get some decent ingredients it might be different, but why can't you?" The man gave a sardonic laugh. "Money problems, kid. We've never been a really well-off village, but ever since." A voice called out from the doorway, "Excuse me, sir, I am afraid I am in a bit of a hurry. Might I get a bowl of?" Lee was about to continue when he noticed Naruto sitting in front of him. Before Lee assumed his customary fighting stance and Naruto leapt on top of the table in a panic, the two boys exchanged silent looks. When he said, "So I have found you again, adversary, this time I promise to be the victor." Naruto couldn't think. If the child was blocking the door, he couldn't flee again, and if he retaliated against a Konoha resident, it would only get worse. "Don't fight in the restaurant, kids," the proprietor told them. "If you ruin anything here I won't have the money to replace it." Lee said, "Oh sorry," and bowed. He faced Naruto once more. "In that case, shall we finish our battle outside?" Naruto scratched his head and swallowed. Do we have to?" The question caught Lee off guard, and he blinked. "Well, I suppose not, though if you were here to assassinate Takara Sama, then I must stop you." Naruto was the next to blink. "Takara? Wait, you think I'm an assassin? No way." Lee scowled as he closely examined Naruto's face. "You might be telling the truth. Your eyes appeared to hold both purity and youthfulness. It's rare that anyone capable of such a deed would have that look." Naruto said, Thanks," with hesitation. He gave the boy a suspicious look, unsure of how to respond to this. At last, he said, Do you know me?" Lee tilted his head to the side and gave him a few quick glances. "Sorry, normally I'm very good at remembering faces, but you don't look familiar to me." Unaware that he had been holding it in, Naruto released the breath. He might still be able to escape this. Lee went on, "May I ask your name? Perhaps that will jog my memory." Naruto cursed, "Damn it. I can't tell you that. It's just that, well, it could get me into a lot of trouble if I did." Lee scowled. "I would hate for you to get in trouble over something so trivial. I apologize for prying." The two boys let out another sigh of relief and fell silent, unsure of what to do next. "Pardon my presumptions," Lee said, "but you must be some sort of high-ranked shinobi in Suna if you are not to divulge your name to others, correct?" Despite himself, Naruto couldn't help but smile. "Do I really look like a high-ranked shinobi?" "Really?" asked the man. "Well, it is certainly not unheard of that someone as young as you and I could be a Junin or Anbu level ninja," he thought. "And it is customary for Anbu to withhold their identities from others." Naruto was powerless to stop it. He just wanted to gloat when someone compared his to an Anbu. "Well, I guess I'm not quite at that level yet, but I will be soon. In fact, I'm going to be the next Cage." As they got absorbed in talking about teammates, training, and techniques, both boys forgot everything else. However, Naruto made sure to keep his younger years out of the conversation and didn't disclose that he had lived in Konoha until recently. Naruto had warned Lee about the quality of his own ramen by offering him the rest of it when he had finally remembered to get food for himself. The owner was surprised when Lee finished the bowl without verbally complaining, probably more out of courtesy than anything else. Although Naruto's mood had undoubtedly improved, a persistent melancholy lingered in the back of his mind. To consider that Lee, with whom he had a close relationship in such a short period of time, had spent his entire life in Konoha. What prevented him from meeting him earlier, prior to the entire situation involving Haruka and Mizuki? Naturally, he had yet to reveal his name to Lee, and there was always the chance that Lee would reject him like everyone else if he found out. Lee said, "We certainly share much in common, my friend," as they were leaving the eatery. Really? He raised an eyebrow in question. Lee gave a firm nod. "We both have someone that overshadows us that we work hard to one day overcome, right?" Considering Gaara and his two teammates, Naruto nodded. "We are both filled with the fires of youth and justice," he said. "Even now, we both work hard to preserve the peace and happiness between two nations. And through our hard work, we both hope to one day accomplish big dreams." Naruto considered that. "Yeah, I suppose so. Of course, I myself intend to one day become the greatest taijutsu master the lands have ever seen, and prove that even someone who cannot use ninjutsu or genjutsu can still be a splendid ninja. And the world will know me as the courageous green beast of Konohagakure, Rock Lee," he yelled, raising his fist in the air. Naruto chuckled because he thought Lee's positive outlook was quite infectious. "Yeah, and I'll become the greatest Kazekage in the history of Suna, and all of Suna will love and acknowledge me, and I'll be called, Naruto bowed his head, trying to think of a more impressive nickname than Lee's, while Lee waited patiently. At last, he uttered the first thought that entered his mind. "They'll call me the pride of Sunagakure, the legendary shinobi, Uzumaki na." His eyes widened in horror at his mistake, and his hand shot up, clamping down over his mouth. He looked at Lee, who was staring back at him, his mouth hanging open a little. He began to say, "Anyo, I thought you weren't supposed to," but interrupted himself before he could finish. He smiled and struck his signature, "nice guy" pose, when he saw the terrified expression on his new friend's face. "I promise not to tell anyone." A tentative smile slowly returned to Naruto's face as his hand lowered. "Thanks, Lee." It took them a little more walking before Lee had an idea. "Uzumaki, you said? I am quite certain that I have heard that name before." As the blonde anxiously awaited Lee's explanation, dread returned. "Yes, I am sure of it," he uttered as he struck his palm with his fist. "It was last week at the Ichiraku ramen shop. I had stopped in for a quick meal before a mission and I heard the owner and his young daughter mention it." Really?" was not the response he had anticipated. "Yes, I heard Ichiraku-san mention that business wasn't doing as well as it used to, and then Ayame-san said that it was a shame that Uzumaki Naruto had left. I am certain that was it." That was a really unexpected response. Did anyone in Konoha really miss him? He was certainly unaware of that. But there had to be some logical reason for it. Perhaps the only reason they missed him was the money they had earned from all the ramen he had purchased from them over the years. Or perhaps they were unaware that he had the Kyuubi inside of him. Those were both significant probabilities. Lee said absently, "How strange that you would share the same family name as him. Are you two related, perhaps?" Naruto went pale. "Well, I guess hey Lee." Naruto didn't even have time to think that she might know more about him than Lee did before she was directly in front of them, but the two boys looked ahead and saw Lee's female teammate hurrying toward them. "What on earth have you been up to?" With a suspicious glance at Naruto, she demanded, "And what are you doing with him? Didn't he commit assassination?" Lee spoke before Naruto could object, saying, "No Tenten, he is not an assassin. Like us. He is here to maintain youth and tranquility," he reassured her. After giving him another stern look, Tenten shrugged and said, "Anyway. The meeting took a turn for the worse, Lee, so we must leave." "An additional assault?" Lee asked. "I don't know," the kunoichi said. "First something happened to Halleck and he collapsed. Then Neji saw something that no one else could see, and then everything just fell apart and everyone ran off." Halleck-san survived, right? Lee inquired. She gave a helpless shrug. "Takara's bodyguards carried him off, and Takara commanded our team to assemble at the mining area outside the village. How about come on, Neji and Guy. Sensei are waiting for us," she broke off. Before he could ask any more questions, she turned and began running again. "We can talk more there." After starting to run after her, Lee halted and turned back to Naruto, saying, "Uzumaki-kun. Yes? Even though we are on different sides, we fight for the same goal," the boy said, striking another nice guy pose. "To restore peace to these areas, we will now need to put in even more effort. Let's both try our hardest." "Damn right." Naruto smiled and gave the gesture back. "I'll undoubtedly discover the source of AIM and Kusa's ongoing issues. and if that doesn't work, we'll just have to beat them up ourselves to stop their pointless fight. May the flames of youth continue to blaze within you, my friend, Lee said, laughing before turning to go. For now, good.by. Goodbye, Fuzzy. Browse. He called after him. Lee vanished from view in a matter of seconds, and Naruto became serious. If things had gotten that bad, he needed to find his team quickly. Unsure of where to begin, he scaled a nearby building and looked around, and after a brief scan, his gaze fell on the shapes of a boy and girl running to the edge of the village with a person slung over their shoulders. Despite the fact that he was unable to see any of his teammates, he concluded that he should most likely be going in the same direction as Kasumi and Kazuya. He then started jumping across the rooftops in an effort to catch up with them before they left. Get my troops together and start digging right away. The stout Kusa leader yelled at everyone in his vicinity, kill anyone who stands in your way. I want you and those two with you to deal with those Suna reinforcements Masamori hired, he said, turning on Guy and Neji. They will undoubtedly come here to stop us shortly, and you are to eradicate them when they do. Takara. Sama, you are probably unaware of this, but the village of Konoha is currently bound in a treaty of peace with the village of Suna, Guy said with a troubled expression on his face. Even in a mission like that, if we attack them in the open, it would undoubtedly. I don't give a damn. You're working for ME now, so you'll follow my instructions, Takara yelled. Does that make sense? Yes, sir, Guy said, bowing his head. We have to get together with Tenten and Lee, Neji. Listen here, Takara said to one of his own soldiers as the two Konoha nin left. I want you to get 24 of our best men and watch those Konoha and Suna teams, he muttered. I want you to move in and kill the rest of them if one of them ends up killing the other. But sir, the Konoha team is our ally here, the ninja said, their eyes widening at the command. You want us to attack them, but why? Because, you idiot, they now know about our gold. Do you really believe that they won't tell the Hokage about the enormous quantities of gold buried here if they return to Konoha? All of it will be theirs to keep. Furthermore, our forces are powerless to stop them. We can't let any of them get away with that information, or we've completely lost it. The same is true for Suna. We only need to murder them and report them to Konoha as combat casualties, and the gold will be ours. The daimyo had never sounded so irrational before, and the man stared at his leader, not believing what he was hearing. But sir, He protested, but realized that it would be foolish to try to reason with him at this point, so he stopped in his tracks. As you command, sir. After leaving the village, Naruto started to jump from branch to branch while stifling a curse as more rain started to fall. He wasn't sure he could keep up with them at this rate, and the rain was only making his vision worse. He was starting to feel totally lost when he heard sounds not too far in front of him. Quickening his pace, he dropped down behind the Aim siblings in a small clearing among the trees, and when the others realized he was there and turned to look at him, Naruto was shocked by what he saw. Hey, you're... The shinobi of Kusagakure had already started mining the buried gold in a meadow 3 miles south of the village where they had met just 30 minutes earlier. Since they had no idea where most of the treasure would be, they divided into groups of 2 or 3 and spread out about 10 feet apart, forming a small ring, and decided to work their way outwards. Some were blessing and others were cursing the rain that was falling because it would soften the ground and make digging easier, but it also carried the risk of washing away any gold that was dug up. Takara was not listening to any of that. Another group, 2 young boys, an equally young girl, and an older man, stood a few yards from the ring of ninja, watching off into the distance to the edge of the clearing, their eyes fixed on another group of shinobi, with the same number and kind of people in it, while their allies were busy digging. All things considered, neither team wanted to be the one to initiate contact because they had been instructed on how to counter the other. So here we are, the black-clad boy said to no one specific. Standing in the rain, staring down a group of ninja that we've been ordered to fight that we're not supposed to fight. We're missing a member of our team. They've already started digging and we have yet to receive any backup. From the corner of his eye, he glanced at his brother and said, it would be nice to know that AIM hasn't just left us high and dry out here, even though I doubt we'll actually need any backup. Is anyone dry? Gaara grunted, echoing his sister's sentiments, and Tamari asked, agitatedly brushing her wet hair away from her face. You understand what I mean, said Konkuro, rolling his eyes. Cripes, if this rain continues, soon everyone will be able to see my true face. Looking back, Baki pondered whether they would have been better off staying inside the trees and trying a sneak attack on Kusa instead of a frontal assault, ignoring his student's commentary as he gazed intently across the field to the army on the other side, barely able to make out the figures of the 4 Konoha ninjas staring back at them. When Baki first noticed those eyes back at the meeting hall, he had been a little intimidated by them. His gaze was more piercing than a hawk's, and it seemed like nothing escaped his sight. However, he had a gut feeling that it would have failed, and it wasn't because they were currently so outnumbered. Gaara could handle the majority of them, just as Konkuro had said. You could call him paranoid, but with eyes like that, Baki was pretty sure they wouldn't be able to get past him without extensive preparation, which he wasn't sure they'd have time for. With a grimace, he said, if AIM would send reinforcements quickly, they could deal with Konoha while his team dealt with Kusa. Sensei, how long do we have to wait? Temari inquired. After giving the question some thought, Baki came up with just one response. We'll wait another 5 minutes. Not even interested in hearing his own response, he inhaled and said, we will follow the orders we were given if nothing has changed by then. Temari gave a sympathetic nod, but her anxiety persisted. I wonder where Naruto is. More importantly, Konkuro continued, I wonder what the hell that Konoha kid saw that we couldn't see. Guy. Sensei, should we not attack them? There's no need to hurry, Guy said, adding that we currently have the upper hand. AIM has not yet arrived to aid their Suna allies, and Kusa has already started mining. There is less chance of significant casualties the longer we delay fighting. Furthermore, I have no doubt that Suna shares our fear of inciting an attack and starting something far more serious later on. Thus, they won't move until their reinforcements show up, and we also don't need to move. Even I am amazed by your extensive knowledge, Guy. Sensei. Lee gave a commendation. What precisely transpired back there, Neji? Before their teammates could begin publicly embracing one another, Tenten inquired, I mean, what did you see? With a contemplative expression, the Hyuga prodigy crossed his arms and said, that's a question. That is difficult for me to answer, Tenten. The boy's admission caused 3 sets of eyebrows to raise, but I saw it plain as day, he said. I just have no idea what it was that I was seeing. As Halleck continued his negotiations with Masamari's 2 bodyguards, Neji sat in silence, Byakugan no longer active, and words came from both sides with a lot of suspicion and hostility and no real trust anymore. The incident with that boy a few minutes ago had caused a huge emotional rift in everyone present, especially since it was still unclear who the boy actually worked for and what his intentions had been. Masamori hadn't said a word since he'd arrived, save for the odd moan, and Takara hadn't been being his usual cheerful self since he'd witnessed the red-headed boy's gory performance. Neji wondered how talented the boy and his teammates were, and he was sure that the boy was dangerous. Maybe he was regarded as a genius in Suna, just as he was back in Konoha. As he turned to face the source, he saw Halleck doubled over, coughing and hacking uncontrollably as blood started to drip through the fingers covering his mouth. Tenten and Guy, as well as Takara's 3 bodyguards, moved to his sides immediately, and Takara appeared to have gone into hysteria as he slid into the corner of the room, trembling and stuttering in fear of an attack that must be imminent. Neji turned his Byakugan back on and scanned the building for anyone who might be involved. Isn't this what previously occurred? The AIM bodyguards were asked by the Suna Junin. Yes, the woman said in a panicked tone, just like this. It must be some form of genjutsu if the attack is invisible to us, isn't it? The team's female member came to a conclusion. So, who in hell is doing it? I've been taking Karasu through every room in the building and haven't found anything, the boy with the face paint demanded. They all sounded sincere in their bewilderment, but if it wasn't them, and no one else was even near enough to be able to cast a genjutsu, Neji scowled, thinking that his ability to read people was unmatched. Then he saw something strange, the hazy material he had seen earlier inside Halleck's body now flowing freely through the old man's body, and he pushed his way beside him, silently observing. Upon closer examination, it left tiny, almost insignificant cuts along the outer tissue of the lungs, stomach, liver, heart, and esophagus. The cuts would have been invisible to anyone without eyes like his, but more and more were appearing every second. It had begun in the man's chest, swam down to the stomach, then back up again to the throat, swirling like a cyclone. It was destroying the old man's body from the inside out, whatever it was. Take a step back. Neji made a demand of the people gathered beside him. Wada Neji. Guy began. Make space for me, I got it, he yelled. As Neji gazed down at the struggling Halleck, everyone took a step back. Whatever was going on inside of him was moving quickly, but if he timed it just right. Juken. Halleck gasped and his body trembled as he screamed, pressing his middle and index fingers into his abdomen before lying down still. Neji. While everyone else made various sounds of incredulity, Tenten screamed. Neji ignored them. The fog. Substance had been blown out of Halleck's body the instant he had struck, and now he was floating in the air above them, And he could see from everyone else's looks that he was the only one who could see it, even outside the body. Takara was shuddering against the wall when the fog started to drift across the room. He jumped forward and jabbed his fingers at the wall once more without saying anything, but the fog changed its path and went through the ceiling, sparing the Kusa daimyo. "Damn it," whispered he. "Neji, what was it?" Tenten pleaded. Neji turned the three escorts away from Kusa, either because he didn't understand the question or because he chose to ignore it. "Halleck. Sama needs medical attention immediately. If that thing returns, get him and Takara. Sama out of here." The three men stumbled, looking at their leader and the elderly man on the ground, and one of them said, But what about the," while the others remained stunned. "Ignore it. We are also departing," Kazuya yelled. Kasumi nodded. "As before, AIM is left to shoulder the blame after one of your own hired hands attempted an assassination in front of us." The siblings lifted the prone Masamori off the ground and declared, "We will no longer participate in this foolish game of betrayal. You can expect no more peace offers from us," Kazuya growled. The four Suna-nin appeared as perplexed and agitated as the others, but they also departed without saying anything more. The two shinobi quickly carried their leader out of the room. While Guy moved to help Takara, Neji watched the Kusa-nin slowly pick up Halleck's prone body while Byakugan remained active. Their sensei jolted the girl out of her daze and said, "Tenten, find Lee. I'll meet you at the edge of the village, where Neji and I will lead our allies." Neji assisted Guy in lifting the catatonic daimyo off the floor as Tenten left the room, but he saw through the back of his head as the previously clouded substance floated out of the building. As he concluded his summary of the event, his teammates stood in silence. Tenten mumbled, "This is too weird." Lee mimicked Guy as they both rubbed their chins in contemplation, saying, "Yes, if only we had just a little more information." They all awoke when Neji said, "There is a bit more," and he looked back toward where the Suna-nin were standing. "I may not understand what that thing was, but I do know where it went," he said. Still not believing what he was seeing, Naruto stared. "Hey, you're..." Both Kasumi and Kazuya looked back, and the boy grunted in frustration as he reached for his kodachi, but the rising man behind them grabbed his hand. The brother and sister looked back, then stepped aside to let the elderly man between them approach and look at him as well, and a dark smile appeared on Masamori's otherwise healthy face. He said grimly, "I think you're in the wrong place, boy." Naruto stumbled, searching for the right words. "Masamori, what happened? You no longer appear to be dying, really." "Let us just say, I'm a fast healer," grinned the AIM leader. "Yeah, I heal pretty fast too, but that's," Naruto said, clearly not convinced. He interrupted Masamori. "As much as I'd love to stay and visit, I'm afraid I have very pressing matters to attend to." "What's important?" Naruto inquired cautiously. With a laugh, the man said, "Why, killing that fat daimyo, of course." Kill? He gaped. "Yes, if it weren't for that fucking Konoha brat, I could have finished it sooner. However, I still have a lot of time." "However, I believed you were attempting to resolve the matter amicably. Do you mean to tell me that you were the guys who?" The man sarcastically remarked, "I think you found us out, dear boy." "But why?" He insisted. "Simple really, we're just taking what's rightfully ours from a greedy pig who can't keep his snout out of our country's business." "I know this must be a little overwhelming, Naruto, but please don't get the wrong idea," Kasumi said before Naruto could begin to yell. "We sincerely hope that we can avoid having to fight Kusa. Takara is our sole target because of this. Even though it was clear from the beginning that AIM contains the majority of the Goldlands, it was his greed that brought us to this point. We could prevent more bloodshed if we were to kill him because Kusa would undoubtedly lose the will to fight. So what was the point of hiring us?" asked Naruto, shaking his head. "If Takara was your only target, why did you murder that man at the first meeting and then the elderly man this time? And why in the world does Masamori appear so healthy now, when only 15 minutes ago he was all but dead?" Masamori chuckled. "Yes, that. I'm afraid that's just an unfortunate, but I'd rather not bore you with that, and I really must get going before all the fun starts." "Enjoyable? What fun? All right now. Your teammates have orders to attack Kusa if they start digging," Masamori said, turning and starting to move into the trees. "Unfortunately, they will most likely all be dead before their reinforcements arrive." The others missed it because of the rain, but Naruto's eyes flashed red with rage. "You bastard! They were sent there to die by you. How can you treat your own allies that way?" He called back, "As a shinobi, I know you'll come to understand that it's all a matter of business, boy," as he made his way toward the tree brush. "I will not permit you to do this. As he started to run after the fleeing man, Naruto yelled, but as he leapt toward the trees to catch up, he felt himself pulled back down and slammed hard onto the ground. He sat up, shook his head, and looked down at his leg, where a thin, weighted chain was wrapped tightly around his left ankle. He followed the length of the chain to Kasumi, who was holding the other end of her kusarigama between her fists in amazement. "Kasumi. Ni-chan?" As the girl's action really set in, he said, feeling betrayed. Masamori turned to his subordinates and grinned at the fallen boy, saying, "Don't spend too much time with him. I could run into another problem at any time." Together, the siblings said, "Yes, Masamori." Sama, as their leader, disappeared. Glaring at them, Naruto tried to pull the weighted chain off his leg, but Kasumi's tug made it wrap tighter. He grimaced and tried to get to his feet, but Kasumi refused to let him and pulled him back down. "What on earth is happening?" he insisted. Although Kasumi's expression was emotionless, he could hear a hint of regret in her voice as she said, "I apologize, Naruto. But we can't let you ruin this. Too many years have passed before something similar occurred." With a frown, Naruto said, "Too many years? However, you claimed that you were only aware of the gold for 3 weeks." "Yes, and having the fortune of finding that gold was the opportunity that Kazuya and I had been waiting for." With increasing bewilderment, Naruto shook his head and said, "That you've been waiting for? What are you saying?" Both of the AIM siblings became dejected. "Naruto, you remember how I mentioned that Kazuya and I were raised in that village?" The boy nodded slowly. "It was used as a trading outpost between AIM and Kusa a few years ago, but as the two nations started to open trade routes to the rest of the surrounding countries, the village's use decreased, leaving it severely underfunded. When the two of us were 12, a pack of missing nin bandits showed up and began ransacking the village. The village had no trained shinobi, so we had no chance of fighting back against them. They spared most of the people, but told us that they would be back in 3 days and would be expecting an offering, one that was far too great for us to even hope of paying. They said that if we didn't pay it, they'd start killing." Naruto shuddered. "What did you do?" Kazuya yelled. "What do you think we did, idiot? We sent members of the village to beg Masamori to help us fight them off, and do you know what he told them? He said that if we couldn't pay for their services, then there was nothing they could do for us." By now the boy's gray eyes were clouded over with rage, so with no other choice, the men went to Takara in Kusa, hoping that he might be more helpful. Like Masamori, he wasn't exactly thrilled when we said we couldn't pay much due to all of the damage we had sustained the first time and our already poor money issues. But unlike Masamori, he promised to send help anyway. The help that he sent, the Kasumi said, was 2 chunin. 2 chunin? Naruto asked again, assuming he had misheard. The leaders of 2 nations could not possibly be so heartless toward their own people. He said that's all we could afford for the amount of money we had, Kasumi said somberly in response. The fat bastard sent us 2 chunin to help fight off 15 missing nin, who could have all easily been junin level. Kazuya essentially spat out. Needless to say, the outcome was obvious. The chunin were killed, our parents, grandparents and friends were killed. Buildings were burned down and all but one of the bandits got away. All because those 2 money hungry bastards wouldn't help us because we couldn't pay them. With one hand firmly grasping her chain, Kasumi placed a sympathetic hand on her trembling brother's shoulder. "That lady that you saw us speak with at the town hall was our Aunt Izumi, the only other member of our family to survive the raid. We didn't hear a word from either Omegakure or Kusagakure for several weeks after that, except for every now and then when Masamori would send a few people to help us with rebuilding, not that it meant anything to any of us at that point." Naruto's foot was becoming numb due to the blood being cut off from it. He attempted to free it from Kasumi by giving his leg a little jerk, but all he managed to do was cause the chain to coil around his ankle even more painfully. His mind was racing, and he grimaced because so many things still didn't make sense. When he pointed out to them, "But you 2 work for Masamori. Why would you become shinobi under him if you both hate him so much?" Kasumi smiled at him sourly. "I'm sure you're familiar with the old adage, keep your friends close, and your enemies closer, right?" Kazuya gave a nod. "We had intended to split up, one of us joining AIM's shinobi ranks and the other joining Kusa's, but since we were from Rain Country, it would have taken far too long to come into good terms with Takara. So we did what we could. The 2 of us, as well as a few other younger people of our village, joined the ranks of AIM. We all told Masamori that we wanted to be able to protect ourselves from future attacks, which he bought. And while a few of us dropped off after a few years to go back to their families, the majority of them were killed during missions. Kazuya and I were soon the last of us still working for him, and we did very well. After 8 years of faithful service, we became members of his personal guard. It was pure torture playing kiss. Up to the son of a bitch, Kazuya said. But it was the quickest way of getting closer to him. Naruto nodded to himself and lowered his gaze. So for all those years, you served under someone you hated just for the chance to kill him, is that it? Close, acknowledged Kasumi. In the years under his service, we have had several opportunities to assassinate Masamori, but even if we had done it, chances were great that we'd be found out, and that would just bring more trouble to our home. Plus we would still be left with the problem of Takara. The plan that we formed was to kill one in such a way as to make it look like the other's doing, but for the longest time we couldn't find any motive for why they would do it. The two countries were always on fairly decent terms with each other, so we were forced to wait for something to occur that would drive a rift between them. The gold, said Naruto plainly. The girl said, exactly, with a smile. It took 10 years, but it was the perfect setup. We knew all too well the greedy natures of both men, and with the gold located literally on the boundary line, all it took was for word to spread to them to set the wheels into motion. As the entire conversation started to register, Naruto's eyes fell to the floor. So why are you telling me all of this? He inquired. The sad smile on Kasumi's face vanished. Because we wanted you to understand, Naruto. We've all been misleading you since before you even arrived, but you need to know that we all had our reasons. Neither Masamori nor Takara deserve to have that gold, because they're both nothing more than selfish, cold-hearted men who are driven entirely by their greed. But the people of our village do need it. But as long as Takara and Masamori live, they'll never allow it. Do you understand? Naruto combed back his tangled hair. Yeah, I do understand your reasons, but what about the rest of Kusa and Ain? Even if you did manage to kill the leaders, if they find out that you've taken the gold and given it to your village, don't you think they'll come for it? Kazuya interjected, they won't if they go on thinking that the other took it. With the seeds of deception already sown among them, they'll never believe each other when they say that they don't have it. The blonde exclaimed, but that will just start the very war that we were trying to prevent. He was growing impatient and sincerely hoped Kasumi would drop the fucking chain. Kazuya simply grinned more broadly, but Kasumi's face darkened with guilt. You truly are green, kid. There is no stopping this war. Masamori may believe that killing Takara is all that it will take, but once Kusa gets someone to replace him, it will all just start again. They'll fight over that damn gold until they destroy each other, which is exactly what I've been hoping for since I was 12. But what about all the shinobi and other citizens of the villages? Doing this would put hundreds of innocent lives in danger. Who gives a shit? Though he didn't appear nearly as shocked as Kasumi, Naruto turned to face Kazuya in surprise. Brother, what? Those bastards did absolutely nothing while the two of us were forced to watch hundreds of innocent people die right in front of us, he growled. His hands clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Why should I care if they suffer the same fate themselves? He asked. Why do you think I hate shinobi villages? As long as they have any sort of power, they could care less about anyone that's smaller and weaker than themselves. That's not true, responded Naruto. The hell it's not, look at your own Suna. One of the strongest hidden villages in the land, but when the insignificant Omegakure asks for help with a war, what do? Send in a single team of shinobi and just hope that everything goes well. And in case you didn't notice earlier, Konoha did the exact same thing to Kusa. Now tell me that isn't the actions of an uncaring, or at the very least, completely naive ruler. Tell me I'm wrong. Naruto found himself at a loss for words when he opened his mouth to reply. He was aware that the cage had only failed to send additional personnel because the information they had been given was wildly inaccurate. They had anticipated that both sides would be actively seeking peace, with an unidentified third party standing in the way. Rather, it was discovered that the group they had gone to support had no genuine intentions for peace and was actually seeking to kill Kusa's daimyo. Naturally, Cage would have sent more troops if he had known that from the beginning, and he was certain that Konoha could have benefited from the same. But for some reason, he didn't believe Kazuya would share that opinion. He nudged, can't do it, can you? Well good, then if you've finally seen my point, run along and let us finish what we started. Naruto said, I won't, with firmness. I can't just stand aside and allow you to do something that will lead to war. No matter what's happened to you, those shinobi and other innocent people who had nothing to do with it don't deserve that fate. There has to be another way of handling this. Kazuya's icy eyes grew even more somber. You still don't know a damn thing. An amateur like you isn't going to stop us. Kasumi and I have waited for this for 10 years, and if a few mindless tools have to die for it to happen, well, so what? As the kusarigama fell out of her grasp, Kasumi shook her head in shock. Kazuya, that's not what. Naruto yelled, you're wrong, as he eventually untied his leg and got to his feet. I absolutely refuse to believe that. There's more to being a shinobi than just being a mindless tool. Just because we're trained to follow orders doesn't mean we're not human like everyone else. Kazuya laughed ominously. Wait 10 years, do some of the things that I've had to see and do, and then see if you still think that's true. Of course, he added as an afterthought. That's assuming you live that long. Kasumi took hold of his arm as he reached for the kodachi's hilt. Why are you acting like this, Kazuya? We agreed that we'd protect him and his teammates, not help kill them. Kazuya gave his sister a fierce look that made her wince, and then his eyes softened a bit. Don't you get it, Kasumi? The greenhorn's already gotten in our way and told us he's going to try stopping us from accomplishing our goal, and with all the time that we've wasted here his teammates are already as good as dead anyway. What do you think he'll tell his cage if we let? He stopped talking when he heard a low sniggering. Wondering what he could possibly find funny about the current state of affairs, the siblings turned to Naruto. He cautioned them, don't underestimate my teammates. He reached for the pouch on his leg and flicked the clasp open, saying, Baki. Sensei wasn't lying when he said that they were the best shinobi that Suna has to offer. And even if I am still a greenhorn compared to them, you shouldn't underestimate me either. He spun 4 shuriken in Kazuya's direction without warning. With a sneer, the older boy pulled out his kodachi and deflected them all with ease. Pathetic, just as I would have expected. Then his cheek developed a tiny cut. Astonished, he extended his hand and ran a finger across it, gazing at the stain of blood on his finger until the rain wiped it off. How? He whispered. His eyes grew wide as he said, I blocked them all. So it was you. You were the one who cut me when we first met. How are you doing it? Naruto smiled. Baki. Sensei told me something important when he first taught me that technique. He told me that weapons without form can't be blocked. He also taught me that throwing a wind shuriken behind a real one makes them almost impossible to notice. The wind. No wonder I didn't notice it either time, damn it. He threw it through that twister he made, so I didn't notice it the first time, but this time I was totally focused on the real shuriken. The aim man frowned angrily. However, the ability to actually throw a wind shuriken through another wind jutsu without it canceling itself out and causing disruption is. With a growl, he put his sword back in its sheath. His hands moved and formed seals as he said, touch a copyright, boy. Maybe you're not a total amateur after all. But you have to be more than just half-way competent to stand up to me. I told you before that your arrogance could get you killed one day. Turns out it will be sooner than even I thought. Kazuya! Exclaimed Kasumi in shock. Don't use something like that on him. He calmly replied, umbrella up, sister dear, creating the last seal. Suppai aim no jutsu. Even though Naruto had been expecting almost anything from Kazuya's jutsu, he was still shocked when a sickly green cloud of smoke emerged from his body. Slowly, it moved upward through the rain, spreading out as it rose higher. Naruto grabbed his jacket's neck hem and pulled it up over his nose out of fear of poison. Although neither of his opponents appeared particularly concerned about getting poisoned, he watched warily, kunai in hand, as they both spread their umbrellas over their heads. He released his jacket and charged Kazuya, intending to defeat him before his jutsu took effect. He made 2 kunai swipes at him, but both were easily sidestepped. Kazuya blocked a roundhouse kick with the flat of his kodachi blade, then twisted it and slashed it downward. As his calf was cut open, Naruto cried out in agony. He dropped back, knelt, and started using the torn portion of his pants leg to tie off the wound. Kasumi was at least not getting involved yet. He saw her standing a few feet away, looking at him with concern, but doing nothing to help her brother. Perhaps he could have a conversation with Kazuya if he could just get her dead soon. But he would have to do everything in his power to defeat her brother. He was just getting back to his feet when he noticed that his neck and scalp were burning. When the burning started to spread across his face as well, he started to scratch at it absently. It intensified as it quickly spread to his arms, hands, and ah! He screamed in agony and collapsed to his knees, frantically rubbing and scratching his entire body. Everywhere his skin ached, as if it were melting away from him. His entire body was on fire. His eyes were beginning to burn, his ears were burning. His clothing did appear to be burning off of him, so it wasn't just his body either. Kasumi begged, dispel it, Kazuya, that's enough. Kazuya strode over to the disabled boy and looked down at him with a mocking glare, giving his sister a lazy look. Now maybe you'll admit to your limitations, huh, amateur? Even as tears of pain clouded his vision, Naruto maintained a defiant glare from his quivering fetal position. What did you do? Kazuya grinned. The green cloud high overhead dissipated as he formed another seal and said, my acid rain technique. Quite literally the most tortuous jutsu an aim shinobi can learn. You just be grateful that I love my sister and respect her wishes, or you'd be dead right now. Although he kicked Naruto in the side. Even though it wasn't particularly difficult, he still let out a painful cry. After a few weeks with those burns, you'll probably be wishing that I'd killed you. After closing his umbrella and putting it back on his back, he gestured to Kasumi and gave Naruto one last snort of disgust. Let's get going, before Masamori has a chance to escape. They still haven't moved, sensei. Indeed, said the Junin absently. He realized that Suna's shinobi were definitely patient. They were still standing exactly where they had been for almost 15 minutes. They couldn't afford to wait much longer, could they? Otherwise Takara. Sama, we've found it. Glancing back, Guy saw one of the Kusa employees wildly flapping his arms above his head. Takara was at his side in an instant, practically jumping with joy. The ninja raised his hand, which was easily the size of his own clenched fist and contained a nugget of gold. As the rest of the team cheered triumphantly, the daimyo grabbed the nugget out of his hands and stared at it in awe. Well, don't just stand there, Takara abruptly ordered. Hurry and dig up the rest. The group returned to the pit after a brief salute, and the others went to join them. Guy was starting to feel nervous. Now would be the moment for Suna and AIM to initiate contact. However, when he turned around again, he saw that they had not moved. But after giving it some thought, he realized that they hadn't actually moved for a few minutes, not even a shift in weight. Neji, can you? Help me. The team quickly identified the outburst after spinning around. Some were being crushed beneath the others in their haste as the sizable contingent of ninja and workers hurried out of the pit. However, 3 of the men were still inside, motionless, with sand and mud mounds creeping up their torsos. The first to respond was Lee, who raced toward the pit at a dizzying pace, followed closely by Guy and Tenten. Neji's attention returned to the Suna group's position as he paused long enough to activate his Byakugan. It wasn't the Suna group, though. Bunshins? He asked incredulously. They had changed out when he had only briefly removed his gaze from them. Damn it, where are they? A few seconds later, he discovered the redhead on the other side of the meadow, hunched over with his hands on the ground. He called out, Tenten, 30 degrees to your right. Tenten, who had been trying to assist Lee in getting the men out of the sand traps, turned to face the direction Neji had given him. When she saw Gaara, she threw 2 handfuls of kunai, each precisely aimed at the boy. Gaara did not move, however, as a wall of sand rose to block all the projectiles. She said, "It's no good, Neji. That sand of his can stop all my weapons." Guy ordered, "Neji, Tenten, Lee, stop him." All previous hesitations had long since vanished. "I'll help the others." At once, Guy. "Sensei!" exclaimed the young apprentice of the Junin. His teammates swerved away and then swooped back in from the left and right to attack from the side as he leapt from the pit and headed straight for Gaara. An unaware Lee was knocked off his feet as a huge gust of wind suddenly kicked up as they approached. Simultaneously, Tenten reacted similarly to avoid 3 shuriken, and Neji abruptly halted his progress to avoid a tiny barrage of needles that came from one of the trees. Neji saw that the shuriken and the needles were both glistening with an unidentified liquid, but he didn't need to be an expert to figure out what it was. The redhead's 2 teammates descended from the trees to flank him as the team regrouped, revealing their ambushers. A frightening looking puppet hung from the boy's shoulders as the girl's enormous fan unfolded. The boy with the painted face gave them a sardonic smile. "No sense rushing straight to your own deaths, guys. The night's still young. At least make things a little exciting for us first." Gaara got to his feet and gave his siblings a fierce look. "I did not ask for you to interfere." Kankuro held his palms up in front of him as Tamari rubbed her arm uneasily. Hey now, come on, Gaara. You got to have all the fun in the last 2 missions. At least let Tamari and I get a little exercise out here, won't ya?" Gaara continued to stare intently at Kankuro, who was likely perspiring insignificantly from the rain. The younger boy turned his head away. "Don't get in my way." Tamari and Kankuro smiled. "Wouldn't dream of it, bro. So if it's all the same to you guys, I think I'll take the girl." Tamari gave him a shady glance. "With all due respect, Kankuro, I think I will be the one to fight the girl." "Too late, I called it first," he recalled. She gave him a sneer. "Why are you so set on fighting her?" "Because I find her mildly attractive and I can't help but think that a battle with you would considerably mar her cuteness," he was quick to respond. At her brother's admission, Tamari was rendered mute. He was half serious and half just playing pranks on her, so she detested it when he said things like that. "Be that as it may, I think I'll still take her." Kankuro pouted and folded his arms. You know, it's not taboo in our line of work for guys to fight girls. Just because you're a girl doesn't mean you always have to fight the female enemies. Tenten raised an eyebrow. She questioned her teammate, what do you think they're talking about? Neji simply shrugged. Even with his strong eyes, he was still unable to read lips, and they were talking too softly. And simply because you're the team's weakest member, Tamari went on, doesn't mean. Growling, shut up both of you, Gaara said, and they did, right away. He took a step forward and looked at each of the three Konohanin. Which of you do I kill first? Tenten's spine tingled at the directness of the question. Lee, however, viewed the question as a challenge and immediately turned to confront him, but he halted when he sensed a hand on his shoulder. Neji said, wait Lee, and stepped up beside him. He took one last look at the redhead in front of him before activating his Kekkei Genkai once more. He had an intense desire for blood and displayed no outward signs of self-doubt or remorse. Anyone who engaged in combat with this boy would undoubtedly be risking their life, and his opponent would have to do the same. Then he said, let me handle him. He moved ahead of him and continued walking until he was only 3 feet away from Gaara without waiting for a response. The two stared at each other, neither blinking nor moving their eyes in the least, defying the other to initiate contact. Kankuro mumbled, wow, feeling the intense tension emanating from the two fighters in waves. Gaara's fighting the kid who sees ghosts. This might actually last a few minutes. Konoha Senpu. All that kept the puppet master's head on his shoulders was basic shinobi instinct. He ducked, allowing the spin kick to land harmlessly on his black hood's pointed, cat ears, a few centimeters above his head. Kankuro inhaled deeply and slowed his heartbeat, which had been incredibly fast. He demanded of the strangely dressed boy who had startled him, what the hell? Who just up and attacks someone without warning like that? In response, Lee said, oh, right. With a smile, Lee assumed his usual taijutsu position. You are a comrade of Uzumaki-kun, correct? Kankuro gave his head a scratch. Uzu. Oh, the midget. What about him? Lee clarified, he told me of the strength of his teammates. To honor you, I shall not hold back in this fight. Kankuro appeared to be amused. That's so? Well, it's not in my blood to turn down a fight that I can win. Though I still wish I could've got to know that teammate of yours better, he said, murmuring the final sentence. Pardon? With just a finger flick, the puppet jumped from its perch and landed between its master and Lee. I said, if you really want to face me, you gotta get through my little buddy here first. He gave Karasu a pat on the head. He added, good luck with that, then leapt back and vanished into the woods. The two kunoichi turned to face the approaching battles. Guess that just leaves us, then, Tenten said, sounding almost casual. She took another pair of kunai from her pouch. And I can't just stand around and let those guys outdo me, can I? Tamari let out a sigh. Perhaps it would have been better to let Kankuro fight this girl, she realized now. Although she didn't appear to have the same talent as her teammates, it was too late to change her mind now. She leaned languidly against her battle fan, which she propped up beside her. Do what you gotta do. Guy nodded contentedly. The workers were free to move to safety when the sand that had trapped them collapsed after he sent his genin over to stop the boy. In order to protect Takara and the civilian diggers from additional attacks, he had relocated them away from the mining site, where a number of shinobi had been positioned. Now that they were temporarily safe, he returned his focus to his students. He saw them on the other side of the field, fighting the young Suna shinobi. He scowled. He was suspicious of that sand user, but he wouldn't question his students' skills for anything. A man appeared in front of him before he had taken 10 steps in their direction. When he saw who it was, he stiffened. Baki calmly said, let's let the kids play alone for a bit. Guy's eyes narrowed. At least for a few minutes, it appeared the children would be on their own. His words, quite an unfortunate situation we've come into, came as he dropped into his combat stance. Indeed, Baki concurred, assuming a position as well. But just so we're clear, this is all for the sake of our mission. With luck, we'll all return to our homes alive when it's over with. Guy smiled, a little relieved at what he had said. Yosha. If that's how it is, then yours is a challenge I'll gladly accept. It was unbelievably painful for his body, however, he could already feel the pain lessen and his skin becoming more comfortable as he lay there and watched the siblings start to move away. Ready to beg yet, mortal? I told you. I don't need your help, bastard fox. The boy's head echoed with a savage growl that sounded like annoyance. Fine, don't blame me when we both end up dead. Shut up, he whispered, using his hands to push himself to his knees. I will protect my friends, and I will keep my promise. The twins, Kazuya and Kasumi, bounded deftly through the trees as the rain finally started to stop over Ames forests. The first twin had a determined expression on his face, while the second twin had a distressed one. After passing 4 more trees, Kazuya realized his sister was no longer pursuing him. He paused and glanced back to see that Kasumi had not only halted but had fallen from the branches and was now fixatedly staring at the ground. He scowled and fell to the ground too, stopping directly in front of her. He asked, "What are you doing, Kasumi?" The rain pressed her long hair against her face, making it hard to see her expression, but he could swear she was depressed about something. "Come on, if we don't hurry up we might be too late." Kazuya could see how distressed she truly appeared when Kasumi brushed the hair sheet away. "Brother," she started, fighting to control her feelings. Why didn't you ever tell me you felt this way?" Kazuya's forehead wrinkled. Not daring to meet her gaze, he cast his gaze downward. "I don't know what you mean. If this is about what I did to that amateur, I left him alive like you wanted." She gave a headshake. "No, not just what you did to him, but also what you said to him." As Kasumi clasped her hands together over her chest, Kazuya saw that they were shaking. "Sis. All those things you said about not caring if Kusa and AIM destroyed each other and all their citizens dying, is that really how you feel now?" Kazuya recoiled, turning away from her entirely. "That's not something that you need to worry about." "Kazuya," she yelled, sounding almost desperate. "How can you say that? You're my brother and you're wishing the death of people who weren't responsible for our pain. How can I not worry about that?" He continued to avoid eye contact and remained silent. The droop of Kasumi's body. "Brother, talk to me," she begged. "All we've ever talked about before has been killing Masamori and Takara. How long have you been holding this hatred for so many others who honestly did nothing to us?" As he made a futile attempt to control his rage, Kasumi could see Kazuya's jaw tighten and his eyes narrow. "That's just the point, Kasumi. They all did nothing." Kasumi made an attempt to reply, but he was not done. "Before and during the attack, yes, I admit that was all Masamori and Takara's fault. But what about after the attack? After the bandits were gone and there was no more danger? Why did no one come to offer any sort of support even then?" All Kasumi could do was shrug. "I don't. God, there were more dead than alive at the time. How many days did it take us to bury everyone properly? Are we to assume that the Kusa and AIM people needed their leader's approval to help us with that? In what number of months did we have to rebuild everything that had been burned down or destroyed? Were we asking for more than the 2 or 3 construction workers who occasionally came by to help us? Since neither village could seem to afford to send us any extra food or money, how many years has our home been forced to live in poverty and starvation? There were so many things that any of those people could have done. Just the simplest of things to let us know that they actually cared about what happened to us and what we'd gone through," he said after pausing for a moment, seemingly listening for something, and then shaking his head. "They all did nothing. We already know that war won't be avoided," he said, slamming his fist into the tree trunk he was standing next to before moving forward to face his twin and looking into her eyes. "It's already a fact, just waiting to be realized. Is it really so terrible of me to wish them the same fate that befell us, so they can understand our suffering and understand what we went through? Is that what truly makes me a bad person?" The warmth and kindness that had always been there every other time she looked at her brother's hardened eyes had gone completely, leaving only a cold, empty hatred, and for the first time in her life, Kasumi felt a jolt of fear as she stared back at them. He no longer felt like her own brother. She still shook her head, though, saying, "No, brother, you're not bad. I could never imagine you like that. I only wish you hadn't kept this to yourself and had told me about it years ago. I was able to assist you. You've been helping me for the last 10 years, Kasumi," Kazuya said, stopping her with a finger to her lips. "If it weren't for you, my rage would have driven me insane long ago, but this is my burden, and when it's all over. But we don't have time for that anymore. We will lose our opportunity if we do not act now. Isn't this what you still want?" As she nodded, Kasumi reached out and took her brother's hand in her own, squeezing it tightly, wondering if Kazuya even realized that he was sounding pretty crazy at the moment. "Yes, you're right," Kasumi said. "Let's leave." "Hold it." A ragged figure was seen pushing through the tree brush into the opening with the twins as their heads jerked around. "You." Kasumi stumbled, leaving Kazuya speechless and unable to do anything but stare. "You know," Naruto said, panting heavily, pointing to his body, where the red rashes and blisters from Kazuya's previous technique were gradually disappearing through his ruined clothing. "These clothes were expensive. And I really liked them." After just a few more seconds of the AIM twins and Suna Genin staring at each other, Kazuya blew up. "You idiot. I actually spared your life, and you dare show your gratitude by trying to stand in our way yet again," he yelled, making his sister stagger away from him in shock. Even the most seasoned amateurs wouldn't be that foolish. "What on earth is the matter with you?" With a feeble smile, the boy said, "I guess I'm just not very smart." Kazuya pulled his kodachi out of his sheath and let out a growl. "Brother. No. This idiot deserves no more leniency. I have no problem being the one to throw his life away here if that's truly his intention. I will not perish. Not when there are dangers to my friends." Then they saw it. A second Naruto, as ragged and enraged as the first, scuttling through the brush into the clearing. The twins froze in doubt, thinking that voice had been Naruto's, but the boy in front of them hadn't said it. Kazuya chuckled. "That's your trump card, Bunchins? You realize that your sister is correct." Kazuya's frown deepened as he said, "What are you babbling about?" This time the voice came from above them, and when they looked up, they saw 3 more Narutos standing on branches. He questioned the first Naruto. Dropping his eyes to the floor, Naruto said, "About how nothing that has happened to you is the fault of those people, and how you're being controlled by your own hate. Amateur, don't even begin with me. You have no knowledge of it." He smiled. "I may not know exactly how it feels to have your family and friends killed right in front of you. But I do know how it feels to be hated for something that I had no control over, and how it felt to hate them all back." But it wasn't just the quantity of bunchins the boy had Medea any mid to high level genin could make as manya. The real issue was that ordinary bunchins were almost never able to speak or move on their own. Kasumi couldn't help but feel uneasy while her brother wasn't looking at it. The 5 Narutos had been joined by 10 more, and it was impossible to tell if there were more to come or not. She had to wonder if Naruto was simply too skilled at the art of bunchins to be able to control them so well, or if they were all more than just ordinary clones. One thing was certain, though, despite Kazuya's talk, she had a strong suspicion that Naruto wasn't the amateur he seemed to be. "I've seen people frown at me with icy, hateful eyes my entire life. Anyone who didn't try to hit me, yell at me, or insult me just ignored me. I detested everyone for a long time because I couldn't understand why they treated me that way. When I eventually learned the reason, it only deepened my hatred for them. I truly wanted them all to feel the pain they had caused me, even if it was just for a brief moment. But when it came down to it, I couldn't do it. I realized that they weren't really who I should be angry at, they were just the easiest for me to blame. I ended up running instead. No matter how horrible I was treated by them, I knew I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I had killed any of them. And I'm glad I didn't, because even if none of them cared about me, I know that deep down they were still good people." Kazuya gave a snort. "You keep spewing all of this crap at me knowing full well that I don't give a damn about you or your sob story, right? If anything, I sympathize with the rest of them. Hell, I've only known you for a few hours and I hate you, too." All of Naruto asked at once, "You just don't get it, do you?" Kazuya resisted, refusing to let the boy's mental tricks cloud his judgment. "I understand perfectly. I know that you're a coward who'd rather run than deal with your problems. Well, make no mistake, I'm not you and I know that I am ready to fight against mine. Aim and Kusa brought this whole thing upon themselves a long time ago." The first Naruto said, "Wrong, once more. You're like me. You're angry at the wrong people because they're the only people available for you to be angry with." Kazuya's mouth tightened. "Naruto," Kasumi said at last, "don't make things." "I think I realized something after hearing that story that you told me earlier," Naruto said. "You may be right in getting revenge on Takara and Masamori, that's plain to see. But the people that you really want revenge on are the bandits that attacked you. That's one of the reasons you became shinobi in the first place, so you could have the opportunity to hunt for them, right? Unfortunately, you've been shinobi of AIM for 10 years now and you still haven't been able to track them down, have you? If you had found them and managed to get your revenge on them, things never would have had to come this far, would they?" "Shut the hell up, amateur. So since you can't get your revenge on the bandits, you're trying to take your anger out on someone else. You find any reason to justify yourself for it even though you know in your heart that they're innocent. But then, what if you do succeed in destroying both AIM and Kusa through this war? That doesn't get you what you really want, and it does nothing to honor the memory of all the people in your village who were killed. You'll still have hate in your heart and you'll just look for someone else to blame for it." The last straw caused Kazuya to snarl in anger and charge Naruto. Kasumi shouted something at him, but the cloud of rage prevented him from hearing it. The Kodachi's blade glinted sharply through the rain before becoming embedded in Naruto's chest as he quickly closed the gap between them. The clone that had leapt in front of the intended boy, however, poofed out of existence because it was the wrong Naruto. Kazuya continued to slash without fear, and each time a sacrificial copy of Naruto vanished. The remaining Narutos entered the battle as if on cue, hoping to outnumber the AIM ninja. Dodging, twisting, lunging, and slashing at everything that moved around him, Kazuya moved like a man under a spell. The blonde army was reduced to one after only 15 seconds of the lethal dance. With a rapacious smile, Kazuya twirled the kodachi in his grasp. An army of amateurs is just as useless as one against a real shinobi. Naruto made a hand seal and smiled back. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Another wave of clones swept through the area in a cloud of smoke. Kasumi watched in awe. That's impossible. No one could make that many solid clones at one time. Despite himself, Kazuya was impressed, but it was well hidden by his rage. Still such an amateur. If all your clones couldn't touch me the first time, what makes you think they'll do any better the second time? Naruto simply continued to smile while creating a new seal, Henge. The twins were given an even greater surprise after another cloud of smoke cleared. Kazuya yelled, "What the hell is this?" There were 24 identical copies of Kazuya and 24 more copies of Kasumi where there had been dozens of Narutos in tatters just a moment before. Unsheathing their kodachi, each Kazuya clone assumed a stance identical to the one the original Kazuya had previously adopted. Kasumi assessed the situation in silence. The swarm of Kasumi clones imitated her action as her hand clutched the scythe handle of her kusarigama and flinched uneasily. "He's attempting to mislead us," she concluded. "He is relying on the hope that neither of us will attack out of concern that we might inadvertently strike one another. However, there's a problem with that strategy." Having reached the same conclusion as his sister, Kazuya laughed ominously. He yelled at the crowd, "Don't be fooled, Kasumi," unsure of which girl was actually his sister. "Just destroy your copies and I'll destroy mine. Got it?" To his annoyance, all of the Kasumi gave a word of affirmation before looking at one another anxiously. He gave a grunt. The child continued to play tricks on them. He wasn't entirely sure about Kasumi, but he was confident enough to avoid getting sucked into his games. She was already doubtful before Naruto appeared, and her hesitancy would only make her more susceptible to manipulation. He would simply need to take the initiative if that were to be the case. With a quick twist of his short blade, he plunged into the group of clones and quickly killed 3 of them. He repositioned his grip and sunk the weapon's tip into someone else's stomach. He was charged by 2 of the clones, who raised their own kodachi to confront him. After avoiding both assailants, he slashed through one with ease and kicked the other in the face with his heel. There was an audible pop as both disappeared. Kazuya discovered that his already intense animosity toward Naruto was intensifying. Even a whole swarm of amateurs couldn't mount a serious challenge, but they dared to take on his form. It was a little offensive. He could hear a few more pops beginning, knowing that Kasumi had at last started attacking on her own. The weighted end of the long chain twisted and flew about in the girl's deft hands as the hooked blade of her scythe flashed repeatedly in the dark forest. The clones of Kasumi started to fall as fast as those of Kazuya. A feeling of dislocation struck him. No clone had attacked him, even though he had been watched after Kasumi. None of them had even given him the impression that he was in danger. When he returned his full focus to that issue, he was shocked to discover that the clones had started fighting, continuing to snuff each other out with their own attacks. Kazuya couldn't contain her laughter. The idiot had been trying to mislead them, but he couldn't even remember which Kazuya he was. They were the ones now, frantically trying to locate him with blind strikes. Muttered, "Truly pitiful." He continued to observe the display calmly for a while before his eyes narrowed in perplexity. In reality, the clones weren't attacking mindlessly, rather, they were banding together to attack a single clone, and that clone was killing them all by himself. That's when he realized. He continues to pose as me. He intends to trick Kasumi into pursuing me by murdering the clones himself. He grinned. There is still no hope. Kasumi is as familiar with my fighting style as she is with hers. She will quickly see through your weak charade. He had just begun to consider that when an even more shocking realization dawned on him. He's fighting the way I do, however, that isn't feasible. How could he copy it so closely so quickly when he's only seen me use it twice? At this point, the AIM nin had become quite uneasy. He called this boy an amateur, but he was becoming a very good magician. How many more tricks was the boy planning to pull? Not at all, in his opinion, since the amateur had erred, as he had done previously. His dark smile came back. In any case, Kasumi was too busy eliminating her own clones to be observing them. She wouldn't notice if the idiot pretended to be him all he wanted. Furthermore, it would only exhaust him and make it much easier for him to kill him when it was all over if he were stupid enough to destroy every clone he had created. He stooped to wait for his chance, grinning broadly. Naruto scowled. Kazuya refused to fall for it. He had anticipated that Kazuya would rush in and attempt to swiftly eliminate him when he realized that he was imitating his fighting technique. That was untrue. He would need to think of another idea. He felt bad about using Kasumi in his ruse. Compared with her brother, she seemed genuinely hesitant about the entire situation. She had attempted to dissuade Kazuya from his insane scheme and had prevented him from killing him with his acid rain. However, Kazuya was too stubborn, and it appeared that even his own sister could no longer reason with him. If only he could defeat Kazuya. When it vanished in a cloud of smoke similar to the ones before it, Kasumi's body relaxed slightly in relief as she sunk her scythe into the arm of another mirror image of herself. She was aiming for non-essential body parts because she had absolutely no desire to kill the boy. She didn't want to kill the boy when he was, like them, merely attempting to do what he believed to be right because she already felt awful enough about what they'd done to the rest of his team. However, Kazuya no longer believed that what they were attempting to do was right after her shocking revelations. Unfortunately, she was powerless to stop the plan on her own at this point in time. Despite her best efforts, she was unable to abandon the only true family she had left, and Kazuya had already demonstrated that he was determined to move forward no matter what. What should she have done? Expecting to find the real Naruto dead at Kazuya's feet, she knocked away the last of her own clones and looked to the opposite side. The fact that Kazuya was still fighting surprised her. He should have finished much earlier than she did because he had always been a better fighter. However, 3 clones continued to attack him, and a fourth was present. Just a few feet separated him from the fighting clones, his kodachi up and poised to attack as soon as Kazuya left a gap. She did the only thing she could, still caught between what was right and what might not be right. Kazuya got himself ready. He would strike as soon as the last clone disappeared, leaving 2 clones and the real one. Then Kasumi dropped his kodachi in surprise as the chain of his kusarigama whipped around his chest, securing the upper parts of his arms to his side. He yelled, "No Kasumi," almost making her drop the chain. His copy said, "Good work, Kasumi. Just hold him down now." During the conversation, with his blade in hand, he ran toward the restrained Kazuya after finishing the last clone. As Kazuya watched Naruto charge him, time seemed to slow down and 100 different ideas raced through his mind. He's a complete amateur. Here, I can't lose. Not to him, not when we're so near to our objective. How was he able to trick Kasumi? Why did he have to get involved? Damn it. It may be too late to stop Masamori already. He glanced down at his sword at his feet. He couldn't even bend to get it because of how Kasumi had braced herself. However, he was still able to get to his. No, Kasumi would also be hit because she is too close. But the idiot will kill me if I don't. Time is running out. His lower back was where he held the umbrella. Pardon me, sister. He threw the black umbrella high overhead, his eyes squeezed shut. Yorozu. Hari no aim. Thousands of long, thin needles spewed out in a wide circle around Kazuya as soon as the umbrella snapped open. Kasumi was too slow to grab her own umbrellas after dropping her chain in shock. The fake Kazuya skidded to a stop and, out of instinct, rolled into a ball and wrapped his arms around his head and neck. The rain of needles pierced the boys' and girls' bodies 100 times over, causing them to scream in agony. They fell to the ground when the needles ceased to fall. The fallen Kazuya changed back into Naruto, whose back was now so heavily covered in needles that he resembled a blonde porcupine, while Kasumi lay still. Moving across the patch of needles protruding from the ground as if they weren't there, Kazuya ran to his sister in a daze. He knelt next to her, gently rolled her onto her back, and held her in his arms. He examined her carefully and was glad to see that the majority of the needles had not hit her head or neck, but that the rest of her body had not. He whispered, "Kasumi," and the girl's eyes fluttered open. "I'm so sorry, this wasn't supposed to happen." "It was, Kazuya," she forced out. "You." Kazuya heard a low moan behind him, and his head jerked up. When he turned around, he saw Naruto struggling to stand again. As he placed Kasumi gently on the ground and got to his feet, a fresh degree of raging hatred emerged on his face. Kasumi attempted to object to what he was doing, but her suffering was making it impossible for her to think clearly. After picking up his abandoned kodachi from the edge of the space, Kazuya stalked toward Naruto, who had just managed to get to his hands and knees. He didn't even realize he was talking hysterically to himself because he was so focused on his target. He stooped to grab Naruto by the throat, pulling him off his feet, saying, "Death is too good for you. If it took me the rest of my life, I wouldn't be able to torture you enough for this. Damn you to hell. How dare you make me do that to my own sister?" In an attempt to breathe, Naruto futilely tugged at Kazuya's iron grip. Didn't make you. His eyes blazed with madness and his grip tightened still more. He held the kodachi high above his head and exclaimed, "It's your fault. It's all your fault. Why do you keep interfering with us? Why couldn't you leave well enough alone? Why won't you just die?" Poof! A huge weight suddenly materialized on Kazuya's raised hand, pulling it hard down behind him and pulling his body backward. He let go of Naruto in an attempt to keep himself from toppling over due to the sudden change. His blood ran cold when he heard a familiar voice ask, "How long are you going to keep blaming everyone else for everything that happens to you?" He was completely confused when his head snapped back and he saw another Uzumaki Naruto. All he could do, given his state of mind, was stare. There was absolutely no rational thought left. Too far gone to notice that his kodachi had apparently disappeared from his grasp for some strange reason. He was too far gone to understand how the boy could surprise him so often. And too far gone to even try to dodge the fist that struck his jaw. The clone assisted the original Naruto in standing up as the Ain Nin stumbled from the impact. He ignored the pain he was experiencing and formed a set of seals with his clone. They smashed their fists into the ground and yelled, "Tatsumaki Shoheki," together. The combined winds created a powerful vortex that blew the unwary Kazuya off his feet and slammed him head first into a large tree's trunk. As the wind subsided, Kazuya fell to the ground, his eyes already glazed over as he gazed at the boys standing tall in front of him through double vision. As darkness engulfed him, he muttered, "Beaten. By that. Amateur. How did I become so pathetic?" It wasn't until he witnessed Kazuya's head fall into unconsciousness that Naruto relaxed his position. As his clone vanished, he let out a ragged sigh and dropped to his knees. He became aware of how much pain he was actually in after the fight was over and his adrenaline had worn off. His skin, which was still blistered from the acid rain, was yelling in agony and objecting to everything he did. The strong wind from his jutsu had ripped out a good portion of the needles that had been embedded in his back, causing it to bleed heavily. More than anything, though, he was tired. But there was still no time to relax. Colleagues and friends were still in danger, and the war still needed to be stopped. Not to mention stopping Masamori. When he saw Kasumi crawling slowly toward her brother, he moaned and started to stagger to his feet. Just as she got to him, he staggered in her direction. Aside from the puncture wounds that remained, Kasumi's condition seemed stable, and Naruto saw that all of the needles had been removed from her body. For a few moments, he stood there and watched as Kasumi wept quietly while holding Kazuya's head in her lap. Softly, he said, "I'm really sorry about all this, Kasumi, Nichan." She gave a headshake. "Don't apologize, Naruto. Before today, I had never seen Kazuya act the way he has. I could tell that he had slowly grown colder and more spiteful in the last few years, but after seeing him like this, I think this is something that needed to happen. If you hadn't stopped us from doing this, I can't even imagine what might have become of him." Naruto scowled. Maybe, but still. After brushing at her eyes, Kasumi turned to face him. "Don't waste time talking with me, Naruto. Your team is still fighting out there." His question was worried. "But what about you?" he said. She paused, looking thoughtful, and said, "We'll be fine. I'm proficient in a few medical jutsus that will sustain us until we can get to a hospital. Naruto, let me mend your back." "No, you should save your chakra for yourselves," he objected. "Please Naruto," she called out. She lifted Kazuya's head off her lap and got to her feet. "I know that it's no way of repenting for what my brother and I have put you through, but it is the least that I can do for now." Naruto wanted to continue protesting, but if there was more fighting to come, he couldn't handle the pain in his back any longer. He turned reluctantly and showed Kasumi his bloody back, which she flattened against her hands. She assured him, "This will only take a moment." As promised, Naruto felt a rush of cool relief rush through his body as soon as they both closed their eyes. After a few seconds, the pain and the sensation vanished. Feeling relieved that even the burn marks weren't nearly as bad as before, he tested himself by bending his arms and back in different directions. He smiled warmly at her and said, "Thanks, Kasumi, Nichan," to which she replied, "I wish there was more that I could do. Even if it were as little as getting you some new clothes," she continued, observing the depressingly tattered remnants of clothing that essentially hung off his body. With a feeble laugh, Naruto gazed at himself. But Kasumi remained serious. "Please stop them, Naruto. After seeing all that you've done so far, I know you can. And tell your team that I'm sorry for deceiving them like this." Naruto gave a firm nod. He said, "I promise," as resolutely as he could. "Thanks again, Kasumi." Kasumi realized something as he was about to leave and she was turning back to her brother. "Naruto, wait. What's wrong?" I need to tell you about Masamori's Keke Genkai. Tamari was feeling very disappointed. When the fighting started, the Konoha girl was most definitely not what she had hoped for. She was apparently only skilled at chucking weapons. It is true that Tamari might have had a much harder time avoiding the deadly barrage of projectiles if she hadn't been a wind specialist. Tamari stopped to see how her brothers were doing as her opponent paused in her attack, likely realizing that her best tactic was failing her. Kankuro had adopted his tried and true strategy of hiding in a tree while fighting the spandex clad boy in the open with Karasu. Despite his best efforts, the boy had not been able to find the puppeteer. The fact that Gaara had not yet moved a muscle against his opponent, who was equally stone-bodied, was a little more unsettling than that. Tamari knew why Gaara was waiting. His sand would be much easier to control in a battle if the rain stopped soon. Nevertheless, the fact that Gaara had not yet moved against his adversary, despite the rain impeding his abilities, was a testament to the white-eyed Konoha boy's skill. What had become of Naruto? When Gaara threw him out of the meeting hall and the boy in spandex chased after him, that was the last time she had seen him. He must have escaped. Perhaps he had reconnected with Kasumi and Kazuya and accompanied them back to aim for reinforcements. However, it was equally likely that Kusa Ninja had attacked him. He had better be alright wherever he was. As danger senses took over, she swung her fan absently once more and watched as 5 more shuriken fell innocuously in front of her, adding to the numerous sharp objects that were already scattered all over the place. As she was about to snidely comment on the girl's overused technique, she saw that her fan had 2 small puncture holes in it. Tamari scowled. It seemed she had been closer than she had imagined to that last attempt. Before she allowed her thoughts to wander again, she would need to finish with this girl. Tenten swore at her bad luck. How could she have ended up facing off against someone who could make every attack she used completely ineffective? The fact that the blonde girl wasn't even defending herself made it worse. Every time she threw a weapon at her, she had just stood there and waved her fan, then responded with a few scathing remarks and threats of pain if she continued. She reached for the 2 scrolls that were placed inside a pocket of her pink vest, feeling disheartened but not yet defeated. "My turn," said Tamari. Tenten, too unprepared to respond, could only watch as she swung her fan in a sharp upward arch, opening it to its fullest size. She was thrown into the air by a strong gust of wind that struck her from below. Tamari leapt up to meet her as soon as her feet left the ground, snapped her fan shut, and charged forward. Tenten saw Tamari rising toward her as she struggled to keep her body steady. Desperate, she reached into her holster for a weapon, knowing full well that it would be too late. Tamari twisted her body in midair, letting the weight of her fan increase her spin. Then, like a bat swing, she brought it around again and made a firm contact with Tenten's stomach. Satisfied, she watched as the girl's body crashed into the trees below. It wasn't easy to become a real puppet master. You have no idea how hard it was to learn how to manipulate a multi-limbed, full-bodied humanoid object that could disassemble itself and reshape itself to fit its many hidden weapons with a single hand. Or, for someone like Sama, with just 1 finger. How she accomplished that was still a mystery to Kankuro. But there was no simpler way to fight once you figured it out. As an example, Kankuro was relaxing on a tree branch and wishing he had a magazine to read while his challenged opponent ran, jumped, dodged, and worked himself into a small frenzy trying to disable the nightmarish Karasu. Maybe, though, he was becoming a bit too accustomed to his safety role. The boy's blows had left Karasu's body with some very large dents, but nothing that couldn't be fixed with a night of careful upkeep. Even worse was the fact that the boy was not exhausting himself. He had been engaged in combat with the puppet for more than 5 minutes without pausing, and he didn't even appear to be breathing heavily. Lee rolled along the wet floor, avoided another big needle that was shot from the doll's mouth, and kicked the doll hard again. The puppet stumbled back to its feet like a zombie emerging from its grave a mere second after the hit sent it sprawling in a limp pile. Unflinching, Lee lunged forward once more, slamming a barrage of blows into its head and upper body. To protect itself, Karasu raised all 4 arms. In an attempt to get the puppet out of Lee's grasp, Kankuro tugged on the chakra strings. However, the taijutsu expert reached out, grabbed 2 of the arms just below the shoulders, and with a powerful tug tore them both out of their sockets. Lee shouted to Kankuro and threw the arms aside, smiling at his minor triumph. "Your puppet manipulation is impressive, but I will not be beaten by it. Tell me, will you still be able to fight after your puppet has been completely disabled?" Kankuro grinned. "Well done, Mo, but you won't use taunts to entice me out. Furthermore, even though you may believe you are aware of my shortcomings, you are still unaware of all of my advantages." Unbeknownst to Lee, He gave a little wag of his pinky and ring fingers, and Karasu's two severed arms silently rose into the air, generating twin blades from their sockets. The blades flew toward Lee's back as he curled his fingers up. Game over. Lee, duck. Before he even knew who had given the order, Lee obeyed, and the bladed arms glided harmlessly over his head before returning to Karasu and reattaching to their owner. Kankuro scowled. He could see the bodies of his brother and the other Konoha boy from where he was perched in the tree. He was sure the warning had come from him, but he also knew it couldn't have come from him. Where he and Lee were fighting, he was looking in the exact opposite direction. How could the other guy have known he was in danger if Lee hadn't felt it? The boy went on, "Stop playing around, Lee," without bothering to look at his teammate. "Tenten is struggling already. Finish with that one and go assist her. He's hiding in the tree to your right." Kankuro's mouth dropped open. How in the foo? Before he could finish, Lee's foot struck his chest, sending him flying from his perch and into the trunk of another tree. He struggled with the dizziness that was impairing his vision as his body slid to the ground. Strangely enough, he felt a little proud that he had constructed Karasu with enough durability to endure several kicks of that force, even though he could swear that at least 3 of his ribs were now cracked. It's a shame he wasn't more tough himself. He started to push himself back to his feet, grunting in agony. Even though he was in excruciating pain, he would be damned if he were the only member of his team to lose. Tamari had to fall first, at the very least. Then he was struck by something that landed out of the sky, sending him back into the tree trunk. Though he thought it might have been the bug-eyed boy not waiting for him to catch his breath, his vision of what hit him was blurred by the water in his eyes from the pain in his chest. He was still lying on top of him, though, and that didn't explain why. He moaned and blinked to clear his hazy vision. Dirty, cheap, shot-taking, son of, oh. He was somewhat taken aback to discover that the Konoha girl who had been trapped fighting Tamari was the one who had struck him. Based on her appearance, she appeared to be unconscious. "Well, happy birthday, Kankuro," he said, grinning mischievously. "Geez, I told Tamari not to be so rough." The girl then started to move. When she opened her eyes and saw Kankuro's painted face, she almost screamed. His paint had run horribly in the rain, turning the elaborate purple patterns into unsightly, slick smudges. Tenten scampered off, momentarily forgetting the pain, as a pair of kunai materialized in her hands. The puppet master muttered sarcastically, "Well, I guess that's gratitude for you, instead. Last time I ever sacrificed my own body to help someone." Tenten gave him a wary look. What was it he thought she would do? Express regret for his teammate's collision with him. Kankuro remarked, "You know, you're even prettier up close." Her cheeks flushed a little at the incredibly unexpected compliment. She stammered, "What are you talking about?" Kankuro smiled mischievously at her. "Modest, huh? That's nice. So tell me, you doing anything after the battle?" Tenten gazed at him as though he had developed a second head. "You're asking me, a complete stranger and, more importantly, someone who's fighting on the opposing team of you, on a date after we get done trying to kill each other?" His smile widened. "Totally romantic, isn't it?" he asked. "It's got that whole Romeo and Juliet thing going for it. 2 children of rival armies meet and fall head over heels for each other, and even though their families would never approve of it, their love pulls through in the end." Tenten noted drearily that, in the end, both Romeo and Juliet commit suicide. Kankuro shot back, "But they never stopped loving each other, did they? So what do you say? I saw this nice-looking restaurant back in AIM that we could?" Tenten interrupted him. "As tempted as I am, I'm going to have to decline. I just can't see myself dating a guy who wears more make-up than I do." A nasty retort was barely bit back as the puppet master's eye twitched. "Fiery, I like that," he grimaced up. "How come everyone in Konoha is making fun of my face paint?" Announcing, "I'm leaving now," as she left, Kankuro sighed and saw her take 2 scrolls out of her vest pocket before she disappeared. "So much for finding a cute foreign girl who doesn't already know how psychotic the rest of my family is. Oh well, if Tamari doesn't kill her I can still try again later." Lee lifted his right hand in front of him and fell from the tree branch from which he had been observing the exchange. "I commend you for sacrificing your own body to protect that of my teammate even while in the heat of battle as we are." Kankuro grinned. He looked behind Lee, where Karasu was lying limp on the ground, and said, "Well, at least someone cares. If you could put in a good word to her for me I'd appreciate it." It would now take a few seconds to stretch the chakra strings back to it without Lee noticing that they had been cut. Uzumaki-kun was very astute in his acclamation of his teammates. The flames of youth burned brightly in Suna as well. For that, Kankuro had nothing to say. Lee returned to his position and questioned, Shall we begin our battle anew? Then? This time, I will give you everything I have. Behind Lee, where his chakra lines had at last reattached to Karasu, the puppet master glanced again. To be sure, he pulled them, and Karasu leapt to its feet. This would be simple enough now, he smirked. He challenged, bring it on, as Karasu swooped forward, ready to encircle Lee with its squeezing limbs. Sadly, Karasu didn't even get close because Lee decided to charge forward at that precise moment, crouch in front of Kankuro, and kick him viciously, sending the boy flying high into the air and snapping his head back. Lee appeared behind him, following his trajectory so precisely that it seemed as though he had become the boy's shadow, while he was still seeing stars. Upon reaching the end of their upward momentum, Kankuro's body was encircled by a lengthy stream of bandages. Without thinking, he swung up the hand still attached to Karasu, releasing it just in time to see the tightening bandages enclose him and make him immobile. Lee grabbed Kankuro and heaved backward, not caring that his arm was free, and they both began to fall headfirst back to the ground. His prisoner was pulled along with him as he twisted sharply to the right, until they were both spinning like a top. At last, Kankuro was able to think clearly enough to recognize his predicament and made a fruitless attempt to escape. He had a demand. Let go, damn it. No, sorry, Lee responded. Kankuro's thoughts whirled. There was no doubt that this would be painful. There was only one more thing to attempt. Karasu flew toward them and encircled the bodies of both boys with its 4 long arms and legs after flicking its wrist. He gave a victorious grin. Now let go, or you'll get it too. Calmly, I can handle it, Lee said. He turned to face the ground, which was now approaching them like a freight train in a spiral. That's not the answer I'm looking for here, he said. Squeezing his eyes shut and preparing for the impact, he cursed helplessly. A sheet of mud, water, and rock debris was thrown into the air as the 3 of them landed with the force of a small meteor. Although Hyuga Neji didn't like it, it appeared that he would have to initiate contact. He preferred to entice his opponents into an attack and then breach their exposed defenses, so he didn't like to do it frequently. However, it appeared as though the sand manipulator was stalling, waiting for circumstances to change in his favor. He wasn't moving an inch. The Hyuga prodigy was forced to strike quickly if that were the case. Both Lee and Tenten had come to the conclusion that they had to use their best strategies against their own rivals. He would also need to take action if they were already that desperate. He had no doubt, after all, that he was engaged in combat with the most dangerous member of the Suna team. Down below, the big spike of sand that had protruded from the ground below him was inches away from Neji as he turned and leapt to the side. He started moving now and leapt for Gaara, aiming for the boy's body's numerous tenketsu. While a wall of sand rose to block Neji's first blow, Gaara firmly held his ground. Neji brushed the sand away with his other palm as he swiped at his body with one hand stuck in the sand. A pattern of Neji attacking, the sand defending, and Neji breaking through to attack again was thus established. Despite his relentless efforts, he was unable to hold the sand back long enough to strike Gaara. With one hand raised, Gaara threw Neji backwards as the massive wall of sand crashed into him. Neji was suffocated under a second wave of sand after barely maintaining his balance. The struggling boy was lifted into the air as the sand tightened and twisted around him. A little let down by how easily even this opponent with the demonic eyes had fallen in front of him, Gaara watched it rise. The sand then just melted away, accumulating on the ground and enabling Neji to fall to his feet as well. Gaara, caught off guard for the first time in a long time, raised both hands in the hopes of trapping him once more before he could get away, but was shocked when the sand beneath his adversary did not react to his commands. Neji exploited his opponent's situation and shot forward once more, causing Gaara to experience panic for the first time in almost 6 years. Taking a step back, he swung both arms in front of him once more, causing his gourd to shoot twin snaking lines of sand. The Hyuga charged through the sand, but the graceful warrior was able to sidestep, deflect, and avoid them both. He gradually drew closer to Gaara as his hands cut through the sand streams with the dexterity of a shark swimming through water. Unconsciously, Gaara took another step back, his fists clenched and twisted, bringing more and more sand to life to crush his opponent. He was still baffled as to why his sand was failing him in this manner. The chakra appeared to have been drained from every piece of sand that came into contact with the boy, making manipulation all but impossible. In spite of this, he was starting to experience a familiar thrill of awakening. The sensation of his awakening. After experiencing a brief moment of panic similar to Gaara's, he became intrigued and desired to join the fight in order to claim the worthy adversary as his own. Blood was what he would want. Lots of blood. Sand started to separate from the mud and rock below, causing the ground to tremble all around them. Even though Neji seemed to be staring at the boy in front of him, he was aware of the strategy being employed against him. It would be impossible for him to stop it all before being crushed because the sand particles were accumulating around him in the form of a big sphere and would attempt to close in on him all at once. If it were applied to someone else, it would be a lethal strategy. Gaara's face broke into a smile. Pulling both hands to his stomach, he clasped them together. Sabaku Sosu. Kaden. Neji yelled simultaneously. The dome of sand pressed down on the Hyuga prodigy from all sides, and he started to spin like a miniature cyclone. In an attempt to keep the boy motionless so the remaining sand could complete the kill, the first pieces of sand briefly clung to him. With a low moan of effort, Neji was able to accelerate even more, successfully preventing the final grain of sand from entering his tiny barrier. He went on until the dome of sand became thin, and then, while still spinning, he pushed off the ground and exploded through it. Before he had finished spinning, he had already taken his stance and landed a foot from Gaara. He yelled, "Hake Rokuhuion Sho," and stabbed the boy in the chest with both his index and middle fingers, too. Despite his grunt, Gaara remained firm. 4, 8, 16, 30.2. His hands were a blur as blow after blow rained down. 60, 4. Gaara was knocked back by the last blow, his feet sinking into the floor. He let out deep, ragged breaths, and his body slumped. Before the sense of victory even took hold, Neji realized something was amiss. The fight should have ended when Gaara closed off so many of his opponent's tenketsu, but he was still standing and there was still sand floating around him. Then something was picked up by his Byakugan. All over the boy, his skin was beginning to split. No, his skin wasn't the problem. His body covered in more sand. How could my eyes have been tricked by that? Gaara lifted his head, his ominous expression intensifying as big pieces of his sand armor shattered off from his head and upper body. Like a furious cat, he hissed for a long time. "You've proven my existence. Now, show me your blood." A lone figure watched from the shadows. With a twisted smile, the man thought, "There's so much fighting going on. Everyone is working so hard for nothing at all." He saw his first target as he moved through the leaves. A sizable contingent of men positioned as far away from the fighting as feasible. An unintelligible nonsense was being screamed by a balding, portly man in the middle of the group. Takara Shigata. Masamori let a low laugh slip from his throat. This would be far too simple. The rest of the Kusa army would become demoralized after Takara died, withdraw back into the holes they had crawled out of, and all of the gold would be his. Naturally, he would also have to eliminate the Suna shinobi. It was likely that they would become antagonistic after learning of their teammate's death. To avoid worrying about them later, it is better to remove them now. The only thing that could possibly ruin his plan now was that sand freak, and he was busy fighting that right now. He would probably never understand how the boy saw him in his astral form, even when he was inside someone else. There wouldn't be any problems as long as the redhead kept him occupied, or killed him. That would be okay too, but if he was unable to. After giving it some thought, he concluded that it would be best to locate a secure location where only he would be able to find his body. He would need to be close enough to Takara to reach him before he expired, but far enough away to avoid detection and allow him time to finish his jutsu. He hadn't been hurt, but the boy had managed to push him away from Halleck. He wouldn't really be in danger as long as he couldn't find his actual body. He took a few steps back and measured the exact distance between Takara and himself. This must be sufficient. He fell to the ground and crawled under a big bush at the tree's base. He inhaled deeply, closed his eyes, and made a seal. Naruto walked slowly, avoiding the tree. Jumping route because he wasn't in the mood for a lot of continuous jumping. Even though Kasumi had significantly reduced his back pain, he still felt more exhausted than he had in a long time. "Looks to me like you could use a pick.me. Up, huh mortal?" Naruto felt the sudden impulse to punch himself in the stomach, but he didn't slow down. "You just won't drop it, will you?" The demon inside him growled, "You'll give in long before I give up." "We'll see about that," Naruto complained obstinately. Naruto interpreted the Kyuubi's much louder rumble as an expression of frustration. It said, "Look mortal," in a tone that was more threatening than before. "You and I are going to be stuck together for a very long time whether we like it or not. I think it would be in both of our best interests to come to some sort of general compromise. So I'll make this really easy for you. All you have to do is say 4 little words. Just say, 'Please help me, Kyuubi Sama,' and I'll have you fresh as a daisy in no time. Sound good?" He received 4 brief words from Naruto. "Go to hell, Fox." The statement literally left the Kyuubi unable to speak. In fact, Naruto could sense the demon raging within him. Foolish mortal! Screamed the beast. I am the most powerful being in the entire world. I have an unlimited source of power at my disposal that could all be yours. How could you refuse such an offer? Naruto yelled back, because I don't need it, and quickened his pace as if he were trying to outrun the voice in his own head. I don't want your help and I've never asked you for it. What sort of hawk? Cage would I be if I needed some demon to fight my battles for me? Besides, I've gotten this far on my own, haven't I? Kyuubi thought bitterly about what he had said. And how many times in the past month alone have you been face to face with death, boy? Will your luck continue to hold out for the rest of your life? The fox stopped and laughed. I wonder though, perhaps the real reason that you don't want my help is because you may find out that you enjoy wielding that sort of power? You remember how it felt to defeat that Konoha traitor with my power. You did it with ease, he couldn't touch you. And you know the same would be the case with anyone else that you used it on. You would be invincible. And you just may find yourself wanting that power more and more. That scares you, doesn't it, boy? You're scared to death that you may someday turn yourself into the very monster that everyone has always seen you as. Naruto came to a complete halt. I'm not afraid of anything, bastard fox, and I will never, ever be like you. I can get as strong as I want without using you as a shortcut, deal with it. The fox fell silent once more. You keep telling yourself that, mortal. It's going to make it all the sweeter when you finally break down and beg. And you will. You will. Ignoring the Kyuubi's last jab, Naruto snarled in rage and resumed his run. By now, Kasumi says, he should be approaching the mining site. You all had better be alright. Lee, that also applies to you. Before Lee opened his eyes weary, the dust and debris had settled completely in the freshly formed crater. Remembering the only other time he had ever messed up the Omid Renge, he gazed at the sky in excruciating pain. It had been around the time he had learned it, not too long ago. He and a training dummy he was using collided headlong with the ground because he failed to release his grip in time. He had been unconscious for a few hours at that point, and he spent the following few days in the hospital. He wasn't sure if the rain or his increased strength had made the ground softer for him, but he was already wishing he hadn't let go as Kankuro had insisted. Luckily, he was positive that he had won the match. He was willing to wager that his opponent's physical strength was significantly less than his own, though he was unsure of this. Fortunately, the boy had not been killed but had only been rendered unconscious. He attempted to slowly raise himself off the ground when a shadowy figure materialized overhead. Do us both a favor and just stay down, will ya? Lee's eyes went wide with surprise. How are you? Kankuro gestured toward the nearby crater. Lee looked to his left and saw that the body next to him, the one he had thought was Kankuro's, was actually the mangled, broken body of Karasu. Kankuro told him dryly, you have no idea how long that's gonna take me to fix. As Lee sat up, a searing pain shot through his back. You managed to switch places with your puppet at the last second to escape injury. Pretty much. He concluded it would be best to keep his right ankle broken from the force of his own landing. He pulled two short daggers from the inside folds of his black garment and asked, what do you say you give up? Sensei told us not to kill any of you if we could help it, but if you want to keep going. I may not be able to help it. Lee remained motionless as he considered his options. Yes, he was injured, but he still had his true trump card and more inner gates to open. If he did, victory would be guaranteed, but would it ultimately be worthwhile? He bowed his head. If he opened his other gates against a foe who didn't want to kill him, Sensei would be upset with him. I yield. If I had not been so reckless with using my Omid Renge, I may have won. I can only blame myself for this lose. Kankuro looked at him bitterly. Yeah. Or, you could maybe give me, the guy who beat you, some credit for it. Lee didn't show that he heard him. He jumped up and threw his trembling fist up into the air, tears streaming down his cheeks. Then he felt dizzy and fell to the ground in a heap in the crater. Sensei, please forgive my hot-headedness. I swear that I will train myself 3 times as hard from this day forward, he said. Kankuro crawled into the crater and started collecting the shattered remains of Karasu, leaving Lee to recuperate. And here I was willing to bet my life that I'd never meet a person more annoying than the midget. Picking up the disembodied head, he gazed at it with despair. Sorry about that, pal, but it was either you or me, and it sure as hell wasn't gonna be me. Don't worry, though, we'll be terrorizing the neighbor kids again before you know it. As he picked up the rest, he took 2 long pieces that had been parts of Karasu's legs and fitted them onto his ankle for a makeshift splint with a strip of bandage. He put the remaining parts together and slung them over his shoulder, testing his ankle. There was nothing else to do but go check on the others. In actuality, the fight had ended before it had begun. Tamari was a little disappointed with the result. She had hoped that perhaps the girl had a little more to offer than she had initially believed when she returned after her initial attack. However, her big finisher ended up being nothing more than more weapons. Even though there were more weapons than she could count, they were all ineffective. At her feet now, the girl lay unconscious, surrounded by so many bladed objects that a visitor might think they were the remains of an entire army. As she gazed in fascination at the ongoing conflict between her brother and the white-eyed boy, Tamari turned her attention to more urgent issues. She had witnessed 3 things in the final 5 minutes of their time together that she had believed she would never see in her life. Someone who could actually stay with Gaara for 5 minutes, someone who could virtually neutralize her sand, and above all someone who could actually hit Gaara. The worst case situation was occurring during all of this. Gaara appeared to be unharmed by the boy's flurry of blows, but it had awakened his inner self. Gaara's bloodlust was now at its peak, and if it wasn't quenched quickly, it would spell disaster for her and everyone else. Someone shouted behind her, "You've gotta be kidding, he's not dead yet?" Kankuro hobbled up next to her, but Tamari didn't even bother to nod. Before returning her attention to Gaara and Neji, she glanced at him briefly out of the corner of her eye. "You ended up better off than I thought. I was fully expecting to have to carry you back to Suna." He retorted, "I'd have liked to see you try to beat that guy, instead of picking on a cute girls that isn't in your league." After exchanging greetings, their concern returned. Kankuro questioned, "He'll calm down again once he kills him, right?" Tamari gave a shrug. "We can hope. Hey, weren't we supposed to be getting some help from Aim a while back? What happened with that?" She gave another shrug. "Beats me, though right now I'm more worried about Gaara and Naruto." Kankuro snorted, "Oh yeah, the idiot's still gone, isn't he? Probably ran back to that village to eat their ramen." Tamari pushed him. "Don't be stupid," she said. The puppet master fought to get himself upright and avoided falling onto the weapon-strewn floor, where he might have died. He complained, "Geez, it was a joke, he's probably just hiding somewhere so the Konoha guys don't find him." Tamari had a contemplative expression. She continued to worry despite the fact that that would make more sense. Baki was starting to feel bad about confronting this man. He was aware from the beginning that he would face a difficult opponent. He simply did not anticipate being so outmatched in terms of strength and speed. The fact that Guy was a close-range fighter and a strict practitioner of taijutsu was the only flaw in his skills that he had been able to identify. He wasn't being given the chance to use his ninjutsu to fight from a distance, which would have been the obvious course of action. In order to avoid Maeda Guy's piston-speed punches and kicks, he had to remain constantly moving, jumping backward and swerving from side to side. He couldn't even find a good opportunity to retaliate at the speed he was traveling. Takara and his excavation squad members were huddled not far from where their fight was leading, prepared to flee if the 2 Junin approached them. Takara yelled, "Keep him away from me, at Guy. Kill him quickly before anything else goes wrong." The portly man's cries went unheeded by both men. Baki kept dodging as Guy continued to lash out at him, knowing full well that he would soon need to think of something to do. He was not going to gain anything by continuing to play defense like this. If he could just find an opening, he had a desperate plan in his mind. It would be extremely painful, but right now, it was all he had. He waited while directing chakra into both of his hands. It was not long before he noticed his opportunity. Guy took a break from his assault to shift his weight to his left foot. He then spun and raised his other foot in a broad arc in preparation for a kick that might knock his head off his shoulders. Baki braced himself, raised his left fist, and made contact with the approaching foot. The impact was worse than he had anticipated. He released the accumulated chakra in a burst of wind just as he felt his entire arm go numb, and it was successful in throwing Guy off balance. He used his other hand to strike when he saw his opportunity, but Guy was still faster than he was. From his already awkward position, the taijutsu master sprang back with one foot and landed sloppily. Although he had been able to halt the assault, any counterattack strategy was also thwarted by his limp arm. While Guy examined his chest, where a long, but relatively shallow diagonal line of blood had appeared, he took a moment to rest, popped his shoulder back into place, and started shaking the feeling back into his arm. To voluntarily accept such a devastating blow with the intention of striking me back. Guy winced. Few men had the strength to do that, though he had occasionally done it himself. Baki checked for broken bones by flexing his hand. Sensing that there was no serious harm, he turned back to Guy. He was able to evade my K's no Yaiba. I won't last if I can't figure out a way to slow him down the next time. The Suna Junin sneered with growing annoyance. The senselessness of this entire conflict was becoming increasingly apparent. The AIM reinforcements were nowhere to be seen. The absence of Kasumi and Kazuya was also noticeable. He wanted to believe that enemy shinobi had blocked their progress somewhere else, but the more time went by, the more it seemed like a single, massive set-up. If that were really the case, there would be hell to pay. Takara's cries, which were still audible in the distance, told Guy to return to his job, do what he was paid to do, obey orders, and eliminate the enemy, among other things. The man was glared at by both Junin. Baki was reminded of an old proverb that his father frequently cited. Having to listen to instructions rather than follow them is sometimes the most difficult aspect of being a shinobi. There had never been a wiser father. They paused to survey the battlefield, Baki because of his clear disadvantage and Guy because of his fear of his opponent's invisible weapon. Both were reluctant to attack again. Despite Temari's best efforts, Tenten had fallen to her. Lee and Konkuro were in no condition to continue, and the bloodlust emanating from Gaara as he made repeated attempts to crush Neji's life could be felt throughout the battlefield. The Konoha and Kusa men, as well as the others, would soon face difficulties if Gaara continued to fight at this pace. That, along with everything else that had happened, caused Baki to make a choice. Go gather your students, he instructed Guy. This fight between us is over. Guy gave him a wary look. Baki went on to say, our employers have failed to uphold their word to us, and since no one from AIM has come to give us further aid or orders, my team and I have no reason to keep fighting. We will pull back for now before Gaara gets too out of hand. I warn you, if that happens, even I won't be able to control his actions. Guy heard the sincerity in the man's declaration, but he had been a shinobi for too long to be swayed by an enemy's words alone. He thought Lee had also lost when he scanned the battlefield once more and saw the black-clad boy standing by the girl. Now, even Neji was starting to lose the little ground he had gained against the redhead. In this battle, the Suna team clearly had the advantage. Baki would have no need to pretend that he was telling the truth when he called for a ceasefire. Baki and he were both deliberating when Takara's frantic yelling abruptly changed to painful gasps. Neji jumped into a tree to escape a particularly large sand wave, then leapt to the next one to escape being ensnared in its clutches once more. He was unable to comprehend why the battle was no longer in his favor. It might have been taxing on his chakra reserves to keep his Byakugan activated for so long while employing his most powerful techniques, but the Suna boy had been working with his sand constantly since their battle started, and his attacks were only getting faster and more intense rather than getting weaker. They couldn't have such a large power differential, could they? He could see his opponent's teammates observing them safely from a distance while he continued to dodge. Beside them, Tenten was unconscious. Lee, farther away, was still conscious but struggling to stand up. The Hyuga furrowed its brow. Was there something about this Suna team that made them superior to his own? Then he noticed something far away that made his foul mood even more dreadful. The chakra cloud had returned and was en route to Takara. Neji winced. Although he was their daimyo and, for the time being, in charge of their mission, he had never completely trusted the man since they had first met back in Kusa. He needed to assist him. And if a thin strand of sand hadn't wrapped itself around his leg, he would have. Like a whip, it jerked up and yanked him violently to the ground. Even though it hadn't hurt much, the fall had taken his breath away. In an attempt to recover before the next attack, he started to inhale, but he was unable to see it because his Byakugan had also deactivated due to the distraction. He raised his head expecting to see Gaara standing above him or more sand rushing down on him, ready to tear him to pieces or bury him alive, but instead he saw Gaara standing where he had been, clutching at his head as if he had just gotten a migraine. After lowering his hands and snarling, Gaara turned his gaze from Neji to Baki and Guy. Bewildered by his abrupt disregard, Neji followed his eyes to find out what had captured his interest. Naruto sighed in surprise at what he saw as he rushed through the final stand of trees into the mining site's entrance. All of them are still doing well, perhaps it's still not too late. Heading directly for Baki, Naruto ran as fast as he could the last few yards of the field. He yelled, "Sensei!" attracting the attention of Konkuro, Temari, and Gaara in addition to Baki and Guy. He paused in front of the two Junin, started to say something, but stopped when he noticed Guy looking at him. "God damn it, I forgot." Baki asked, "What in God's name happened to you, boy?" He was greatly calmed by that question. Upon closer inspection, Guy was staring at him in the same way Baki was. Wondering how he had gotten to be in such a miserable state, rather than in recognition. His entire body was bloodied and blistered, his clothes were torn, and his face and chest were covered in mud. He wasn't sure he would recognize himself if he looked in a mirror. Fortunately, Baki had been astute enough to avoid calling him by name. He blurted out, "That's not important," before Guy could see his face clearly. "Sensei, have you seen Masamori recently?" Baki had a curious expression. "Masamori? No, not since the meeting when the twins took him back to AIM. Why?" "We have to find him. He was coming here to assassinate Takara." Guy questioned him. "Are you sure about that?" "He set us up, Sensei. He expected us to all die fighting against Kusa and Konoha without sending reinforcements, and then he's going to kill Takara and take all the gold buried here for himself." Naruto stumbled, avoiding eye contact. Baki did a good job of hiding the fact that this news might surprise him. How does he plan? An uproar was heard, and the question was left unfinished. When the three turned in response to the noise, they noticed that Takara was on his back, convulsing violently, and that the miners were kneeling around him. "No!" Guy yelled, sprinting in the direction of the daimyo. As he and Tamari joined Baki and Naruto, Kankuro questioned, "Now what's going on?" "Damn, I was too late," Tamari said. "What's happening, Naruto?" Personal questions would have to wait until later, but judging by the boy's appearance, that was only one of many questions she had for him. "It's Masamori," he clarified. "He's using a Kekkei Genkei to split a phantom body from his real body. Now he's inside Takara and is destroying him from the inside." It took a few moments for his audience to fully absorb that information. Kankuro asked out loud, "Just like what happened to the old man earlier, huh?" Baki's mind raced. "In that case, we need to find Masamori's physical body and kill it." Naruto gave a headshake. "That won't be enough. Kasumi told me that even if his real body is destroyed, his phantom body could keep living inside other people." Kankuro shouted, "Then how the hell are we supposed to fight that?" "Withdrawal is our only option," Baki said. "We stand no chance against an opponent that we can't kill or even see." Once more, Naruto protested by shaking his head, "But we can't just leave. What about the others?" "You can't save everyone every time, kid," Kankuro said with no holds barred. Tamari doubled over in agony as she attempted to express her own viewpoint but was cut off by a sharp pain in her stomach. Even though Masamori was only a foot away from some of them, no one else could hear the sound of his phantom body laughing. He gazed down at his nemesis's still convulsing body. After their insides were torn apart, he always liked how their faces twisted in such strange ways. "We have to take him to a hospital," exclaimed one of the men. The man in green said to them, "I think it's too late for that, but do what you can for him, with regret." "You're not as stupid as you appear to be," Masamori reflected. "It will be 2 minutes before he dies. Well, now." He turned his focus to the Suna team, leaving Takara for the soon-to-be dead man. He had no idea how the Naruto boy had escaped Kasumi and Kazuya or why he was still alive, but he already appeared to be half dead. The girl, the redhead, and the Junin appeared to be the healthiest of the group. Before they had an opportunity to flee, they would need to be the first to leave. He most certainly didn't need Suna's full breath to return anytime soon. "Well then," he said, smiling as he gave the young girl a quick glance, "ladies first, I suppose." Without any further delay, he entered Temari's body and got to work. "Tamari!" exclaimed Naruto as he approached the girl. At her other side, Kankuro quickly joined him. Having already become weary of all the surprises happening today, he yelled, "Now what?" "It's Masamori again. He's inside Tamari now." As Temari's mouth started to bleed, Kankuro's anxiety grew. "Well, what are we supposed to do?" In desperation, Naruto's fists clenched. I don't know. Kekkei Genkei. Yes, it's what he used to try to kill Halleck earlier, and he'll use it again to kill Takara and anyone else that is still fighting out there, including your teammates. What is it then? It's called Seikatai, or astral body. By accumulating a vast amount of chakra, Masamori is able to split his body into a physical form and a phantom form. While in his astral phantom form, his physical body grows deathly weak, but he gains the ability to enter other bodies. When he does, he releases his stored chakra, which runs rampant through the victim, destroying their internal organs, and ultimately leading to their death. So how do I stop him? That's the problem. Once Masamori's phantom form leaves his body and enters another, the only surefire way of stopping him is to kill the person he's in. Then the phantom form will perish along with him and his physical body will be as helpless as an invalid. Isn't there any other way? None that I know of. The phantom form can't be damaged through normal methods, and even if you kill his physical body, the astral form can live on so long as it has a body to inhabit. If you can't kill him before he leaves his own body, it's the only way. Naruto felt more powerless than ever as Temari's violent coughing became more intense. In this way, how was he supposed to save her? There must have been a method that Kasumi was unaware of. Should Temari pass away in this manner in front of him, he would. Before they knew what was going on, both boys instinctively leapt backward onto a sheet of sand. When they did, Temari was securely bound inside Gaara's Sabaku queue. Naruto angrily started digging and clawing at the pile of sand to get to the girl who was trapped inside, screaming, "What do you think you're doing?" "I am going to destroy him," stated Gaara, "but you'll kill Temari." "Yes." Naruto stopped. His eyes were filled with horror as he turned to face Gaara. "You." Gaara reasoned, "It's better that I kill him along with her because she will die anyhow." He gestured to the sand prison with his right hand. Naruto's fist made a sharp cracking contact with Gaara's jaw. Gaara was knocked off his feet by the force and landed on a blanket of sand that had formed just before he hit the ground. Gaara just gazed up at the darkened sky above him, while Kankuro let out a shrill cry of surprise. Temari was left in a heap as the sand mound that had surrounded her dissolved. Kankuro fell backward onto the ground beside his sister after his good leg failed him. He didn't. Tell me that idiot didn't just. Slowly, Naruto's blood-stained eyes returned to their typical blue color. His body shook with anger as he demanded, "What kind of human being are you? You were actually going to kill your own sister, weren't you?" The Kyuubi growled in surprise and annoyance from its sealed prison. Gaara was gently placed on the damp ground as the sand beneath him slipped away. With a smear of blood at the tips, he rose to his knees and put 2 fingers to his split lip, pulling them back. "Did he hit me? Did he hit me? He hit me?" Naruto noticed Gaara's body beginning to tremble just as he turned to see how Temari was doing. He glanced over his shoulder to where Temari lay on the ground beside a seated Kankuro. He didn't know how she was doing other than the fact that she had stopped coughing. Given how terrified Kankuro's eyes were fixed on Gaara, he may not have even realized Temari was still there. The red-headed boy started to rumble low, and the others didn't realize he was laughing until he lifted his head off the floor. It was a cold, insane laugh. "What a waste." Kankuro swore in his head. "I was correct. Gaara only chuckles when he assumes command. Why did this have to occur now, damn it?" "I knew it," Gaara said in a much gravelly, deeper voice than usual. "I sensed you before. You're him, just like Me, the fox." Gaara's words caused Guy, who was on her way back after the others had taken Takara away, to freeze. "Fox." In an attempt to understand what had just been said, Kankuro looked back and forth between Naruto and his insane brother. A sense of impending doom tightened Naruto's body. The sand freak was really crazy. He actually would have killed the girl to kill him if the Naruto boy hadn't intervened. He couldn't afford to leave that one alone, and he needed to make a decision fast. He must be the first to pass away. The astral body of Masamori descended into Sabaku no Gaara's body without anyone noticing. As soon as he stepped inside, he realized something was amiss. Nothing appeared to be in place, but he was unquestionably inside the boy's body. Even though it was completely dark and he was unable to sense any of the boy's internal organs, everything still felt incredibly heavy and not at all like how he usually felt in someone else's body. But he would need to work quickly. The Konoha boy's recovery time was uncertain, and it would be even worse if another enemy decided to try to kill him before he could make his getaway. However, since he was unable to sense anything to destroy, how was he to begin? A pair of enormous black and gold orbs materialized above him as he pondered. He felt a chill of fear when he realized that there was a deadly intent present. He looked up to see the enormous glowing orbs hanging above him, and just below it, a huge, jagged maw opened its mouth and let out a breath that was like the dry winds of the desert. Before the demonic creature let out a spine-tingling scream, the astral man and the creature exchanged a look. Geetoouut. Masamori was so terrified that he hardly had time to form the seal to get out of the body before the thing could devour him. Gaara simultaneously screamed in agony and gripped his head tightly with both hands. The others fled back in fear, thinking the boy would lose his temper at any second. Baki took the time to pick up Temari, who had gone motionless but was now bleary-eyed as he watched the events, while Gaara fell to his knees, still gripping and clawing at his head. Guy decided it was time to gather his students and head out. In just a few seconds, the boy's aura had become 5 times more lethal and twice as powerful. For the first time in his young life, Neji was questioning his own eyes as Guy approached him. That weird black thing in Gaara's abdomen had flared with a dark light for the smallest of seconds after the mass of chakra had left the girl's body and entered Gaara's, and then the chakra cloud was out once more, this time without harming Gaara's organs. "Who is that man?" He stood up and saw Lee staggering toward him with a still, unconscious Tenten leaning on his shoulder. He said, "What is happening, Guy? Sensei?" Ignoring his question, he responded, "Can you run with her?" Lee gave a firm response, "I think so," before his knees gave way under the strain. Guy turned to Neji after steadying him with one hand. With a sympathetic sigh, Neji pulled Tenten from his and laid her on his back. "As far as I can tell, the mission has fallen through, and we'll be retreating shortly," Guy said. Lee said again, "Retreating? But what about?" "There's nothing else to achieve here," he interrupted, his tone acrimonious. "Takara's been killed, and if we stay any longer, we could be next." Reluctantly, Lee nodded. They had therefore failed a mission. It was their first since joining the team last year. When he saw a familiar figure, he reflected on what had happened with the others and tried to think of what they could have done better to help them succeed. Uzumaki-san. He pondered, uncertain as to whether he was right. The boy appeared to have just emerged from a week in the Konoha interrogation dungeon, despite having a Tsunahite and what appeared to be blonde hair underneath the mud-caked head. His body failed him again, and he crashed as he attempted to run to him. Guy knelt beside Lee and demanded, "Lee, what are you doing?" Despite the disapproving cracks of his bones, Lee grimaced and stood back up. "I apologize for being so weak, Guy. Sensei. You trained me better than this." In spite of himself, Guy grinned. "It can't be helped, Lee. Luck just wasn't on our side today. We can at least count our blessings that we're all still alive and will be able to return home." Neji's remark, "Not yet, we can't," captured the entire focus of his team. "I don't think we're out of the woods just yet." And what was that? For heaven's sake. I would have been completely consumed by that thing if I had been even a millisecond slower. I didn't realize how much of a freak the boy is. I've heard stories of people who have demons trapped inside of them, but to really encounter one like this, and during such a sensitive moment. Masamori swore. If he couldn't enter a body and remain there for more than a few seconds, his phantom body wouldn't be able to survive much longer. He would have to return to his own body at this rate, which would allow them all time to flee. What had gone wrong? He ought to have won by now, and everything ought to have gone according to plan, however. His gaze fell upon Naruto, the blonde brat. That was it. That boy was the one who had initially discovered his scheme. In some way, he had prevented Kasumi and Kazuya from coming to his aid. Everything had been messed up by him. Masamori gave him a frown. There was only one person he would never allow to escape, and that was it. It was unfortunate that he would have to act quickly before the others could sacrifice the boy to obtain him. He truly wanted this boy to endure a lot of pain. Well, he had to give up some things too. He plunged in. Kazuya started to stir just as Kasumi was finishing up the last cut on his head. "Brother," she said hesitantly. Slowly, his eyes opened and he looked up at his sister. "Kasumi? What?" He sat up abruptly and looked down at his hand in shock. "That amateur actually beat me." "Brother," she said again, her voice more frantic. Unintentionally, he grabbed her by the shoulders as he spun around on her. "How long have I been out?" Kasumi winced. About 10 minutes, but," after saying, "Then there still might be time," he jumped up and sprinted to retrieve his dropped kodachi. "Let's hurry. There's a chance that they're still fighting out there." "Kazuya, stop." His face was filled with confusion as he froze and gazed at her. "What's wrong? We don't have time to stand around and talk or everything will be ruined. We can still." Kasumi rushed over to him and buried her face in his chest while throwing her arms around him. She sobbed, "Just stop this, brother, please, just, no more." He yanked the girl away from his body to meet her gaze, his bewilderment growing even more. "I don't understand what you're saying, Kasumi. Stop what?" In between sobs, she cried, all of this revenge nonsense. I just can't take it anymore." Kazuya's worried and perplexed expression instantly changed to anger. "Did that amateur say something to make you?" "It's not Naruto, you fool, it's you. My god, Kazuya. Look at what's become of you. You've gone insane. You're so obsessed with your vengeance that you were even willing to hurt me to accomplish it. The Kazuya that I've grown up with my whole life would never do that." Kazuya dropped his arms limp to his side. His voice was weak as he said, I didn't want to." "But you still did it," continued Kasumi, still gasping from her impassioned tirade. "If I didn't have medical jutsu knowledge, that attack of yours could have killed me. And for what? So you could get your revenge on Masamori and Takara and start a war between the countries?" Kazuya's eyes fell to the floor, dark and filled with guilt. "Kasumi," he said with despair. "I love you. You're my sister and the only real family I have now. But, But we've been working toward this moment for 10 years now. 10 years of complete dedication to killing those two bastards and never once looking back. Do you really want to turn back now that we've come so close? With a firm nod, Kasumi wiped away her tears. She slowly gave him another embrace, this time much more gently, saying, "Getting to this point is what brought you to such a horrible state in the first place. I can't bear to see what might happen to you if we go any further. I just want my brother back. If I lose him, then I'll have nothing left." The boy's whole body trembled as he tried to comprehend what was going on. Did this imply that their final decade would be a total waste of time? Would his sister's change of heart mean that their home would have to endure the same misery as before? Now how could he simply go back? He was unable to, not so close, not so late. It had been too long for him to simply forgive and move on. He balled his fist firmly around his kodachi's hilt. But since that was what Kasumi desired, he would have to. The blade then dropped out of his grasp. Masamori, completely bewildered, yelled, "What is this?" The demon creature inside the sand user was the first, and now this. Once more, there were no internal organs in the region he was in. The location actually looked more like a sewer. Before him, a dark corridor led down to murky water that was an inch deep on the floor. And there was a huge cage door right in front of him. It was big enough that he could have easily slipped through the bars even if he had been physically present. Then what? Where would this sewer take him, for crying out loud? What on earth was it doing inside the body of this boy? When he sensed it, more questions started to freeze in his throat. A murderous intent so ominous that it made the creature in the sand freak's body seem like a housecat by comparison. He sensed that this new power was breaking away the very chakra that supported his astral form. During his astral form, Masamori was unable to perform a number of tasks. He was able to tremble in terror, die from cardiac arrest, and urinate because he lacked a solid body and organs of his own. This was lucky because he would have done all three as he gazed in horror at the new sight in front of him. A huge crimson face with even more crimson eyes was staring at him with mild interest. The thing's body and face billowed and swirled, as if it had no more shape than his own body at the moment. The animal's jaw opened to reveal a row of solid, razor-sharp teeth. The mouth kept opening until it looked like a very savage smile. "My oh my," it roared in a dark voice. "Company, how lovely." This was the last push. Masamori simply could not stand this any longer. Ignore the wealth and the retaliation. Ignore everything else. He needed to leave this place, leave this body, leave this field, and return to AIM so he would never again have to see another Suna freak. He flew to the cage like a bullet, stopped dead, and was then jerked back in by an invisible force. He attempted to pass through the ceiling without pausing to consider how or why, but the outcome was the same. The Kyuubi watched in amusement as he made 5 more attempts to break out of the prison. Masamori whispered in a trance, "Ho! How is this possible? This body. It can't be held by anything." Kyuubi let out a harsh, loud laugh. "In your last few moments of life, human, I advise you to direct your attention to that slip of paper up there on the door." The leader of AIM, still terrified at the sound of the fox demon's voice, slowly raised his head, his eyes landing on a piece of ragged paper that had been affixed to one of the bars. The word, seal, came out of his mouth, but there was no sound. Kyuubi went on, "I'm afraid that's all there is to the little tour of my domain," in a tone that, but for the deathly undertones, could almost pass for conversation. "So then, since you're my first official guest, and since it's been so long that I could care less which way we do it, I'll let you decide. Quick and easy, or slow and excruciatingly painful." The AIM leader jolted out of his daze and pushed himself into the prison's corner as deeply as he could. "S's. Stay away from me, monster. Don't come near me." The fox's eyes narrowed a little, then flashed another evil smile. "Slow and painful it is, then." He cried out, "No, no, I don't deserve this. Leave me alone. Leave me Al. Ah. What do we do now? We have no choice, Takara. Sama gave us orders, and even if he has been taken out, we must follow them. So we move in? Yes." Naruto gripped his stomach tightly as he screamed, "Ah." In an instant, Baki was by his side, watching Gaara closely, who was now murmuring to himself, "Naruto, is it him again?" Suddenly, Naruto relaxed. Sweat trickled down his muddy face in quick beads as he sat back on his feet. "I'm okay," he told him confidently. I think it got him." "It?" Baki inquired before realizing, "You mean, the fox?" He gave a nod. "Yeah, I think so. I felt them both for just a second, now I don't feel either." Baki considered the possibility that Masamori had escaped from his body, as he had done with Gaara and Temari. Naruto asked, "What's happening to Gaara?" "Oh no," Baki cursed in his head. "We need to get away before he wakes up any further. Can you move on your own?" Uncertain, Naruto gazed at him. "Yeah, but what's going on? Who's waking up?" A loud rustling of trees diverted Baki's attention before he could respond. As the group looked around, they noticed a number of armed shinobi jump into the clearing and swiftly encircle the Konoha and Suna teams. Kankuro was the one who encapsulated the opinions of almost everyone at the time. For the love of God, is this giant clusterfuck of a battle ever going to end? One of the Kusa shinobi yelled to the others, "Strike them all down. Don't let Takara Sama's death go unpunished," the others cried out in unison. Guy couldn't help but think that things were becoming bleak. Now that they had more than 20 new adversaries to contend with, none of his students were fit to fight again, and the Suna team was likely no exception. In what way were they going to escape this one? When the ground started to tremble, the Kusa army started to advance. A number of shinobi were knocked off their feet as the rumbling intensified. Temari was raised into Baki's arms. He yelled, "Naruto," over the rumbling. "Help Kankuro. We have to get away now." Incredulous, Naruto gaped. "What about Gaara?" With a desperate shout, the Junin exclaimed, "That's who we're getting away from. Now move." Gaara was kneeling with his hands pressed firmly to the ground, and Naruto found him in a split second. The portion of his face that he could see was twisted into a barbaric glower, but he could hardly see it. Without hesitation, Naruto dashed to Kankuro, positioned himself beneath the boy's arm to relieve his injured foot's weight, and ran as quickly as he could. Neji and Guy were carrying Tenten and Lee, respectively, in the opposite direction. "Stop them!" yelled the lead Kusa ninja. They were swept off their feet as the ground below them erupted in a massive sand geyser as they started to chase. Despite feeling as though they were sinking into the sand below, Naruto and the others persisted. As they ran farther, Team Guy sensed sand particles clinging to them and trying to drag them back. Using the last of his chakra, Neji cut the sand ropes with one hand, cutting them off. They were given enough time to return to land, but they continued after that. Once more arriving at the trees, Naruto stumbled and collapsed alongside Kankuro. Although he would definitely punch the midget once they were out of this situation, Kankuro felt that this was not the time to be snide and bit back an insult as pain shot through him. Naruto turned back as they stood up, gasping in shock at what he saw. The entire Kusa army was being lifted high into the air by the sand, which had flattened them all. Naruto stumbled. "He's not going to." A hand was placed on his shoulder by Baki. When Gaara gets excited or angry, his inner self awakens. This is the result of that. While watching this, Naruto found it hard to comprehend how Baki could sound so composed. And what was meant by inner self. He said, "Shouldn't we stop him? There is no stopping him like this. We can only let it go, so that his inner self will be sated and returns to sleep." Now in the form of a huge sphere, the mass of sand ceased to rise. As Gaara raised his hands above his head, he could still hear the captives' various cries of terror. Shinumi. Sabaku Soso. 4 out of the 6 people who were awake were horrified when the orb burst, scattering blood and sand across the field and leaving the last person standing there with his face once more wearing a stoic mask. In a way, we couldn't have been more fortunate to have those Kusa nin show up. "Fortunate?" questioned Naruto incredulously. "Yes," Baki firmly replied. "If they hadn't been there, it would have been us who got crushed to death by Gaara." Naruto gazed around the campsite, allowing that to sink in. They had only traveled a mile before being compelled to halt in order to tend to their injuries and establish camp because they were all so badly injured and it was already so late. Naruto washed the mud and dried blood off his body in a nearby stream that they had discovered. Baki had provided him with an extra cloak to wear until they returned to Suna. After wrapping Kankuro's leg appropriately, he now dozed off amidst the massive stack of Karasu's components, which he had already begun mending. Baki was fine, and he was once more gazing intently into the campfire, except for a big, unsightly bruise that had appeared on his left hand and lower arm where it had struck Guy's foot. Naruto noticed that Temari was shifting uneasily in her sleeping bag. Since Masamori's attack, she had been slipping in and out of consciousness. Baki couldn't do much for her because all of her wounds had been internal, and Naruto had remained by her side in case something went wrong. She opened her eyes and looked at Naruto. Weakly, "Hey," she said. His eyes were worried as he knelt beside her. "How do you feel?" She gave a gentle smile. "Hurt like a bitch, but all live." Naruto let out a sigh. "That's good." Temari laughed, and then coughed painfully. Naruto bowed his head and grimaced. "I'm sorry, Temari. Nichan. If I got him there sooner I could have stopped him from." "Shut up, Naruto," she said without much conviction. "I don't need you beating yourself up over it. Besides, if you hadn't found out what Masamori was planning in the first place, then we might all be dead, right?" "I guess so," he said in agreement. "Good." She moved once more as she experienced a slight ache in her abdomen. "So whatever happened to you? I was getting worried." Temari saw the astonishment on Naruto's face as he raised his head once more. "Why? You were?" She nodded, suddenly feeling a little uncomfortable. "Of course. You were the one I was most worried about." The admission caused his heart to race, but the sensation was short-lived. "Because I'm still the weakest?" Temari gave him a fierce look. "Don't you start talking like that, Kazuya creep," she said. "If we hadn't been on a mission with him, I'd have beat the snot out of him for the way he was treating you and the rest of us." As he told her the truth, Naruto couldn't help but laugh, wondering how she would respond. She went on, "And no, it's not because you're the weakest," as she felt the darkness encroaching on her once more. "It's because we're friends, and friends look out for each other." She didn't see the joy on his face because her eyes closed too quickly. Companions. Not merely teammates, not merely someone she must tolerate, but friends. It never occurred to him that such acceptance would feel so good. And he had attempted her murder. That bastard had attempted to kill her, and she was the only person other than Lee who had referred to him as a friend. He stood far away from the rest of the camp, staring at Gaara with a glare that was as blank as ever, as if he hadn't just killed an army of shinobi by himself, as if he hadn't planned to kill his own sister without even the smallest trace of regret. He would not tolerate that for long. Soon, he would make him pay for that. Guy observed his students' sleeping bodies. Each of them needed to recuperate severely. Who could have predicted how badly the mission would go, or that they would be up against such formidable foes? Then there were the betrayals on both sides, along with a dozen or so other things for which he was unable to find answers. The entire mission no longer seemed worthwhile. Who was that boy from Gaara? Back in Konoha, he was acquainted with Anbu, who lacked such authority. It reminded him of the other boy. The one Gaara had referred to as the Fox. He wished he could have seen the boy more clearly, or at least heard his name. Him wasn't necessarily the case, was it? Fox? Was Fox merely a huge coincidence, or could it have been a nickname or a title? It was probably a 1 in a million chance that Uzumaki Naruto would join Suna and just happen to be on the same mission as them. If only they hadn't had to leave so fast. In any case, reporting it to the Hokage would still be wise, just in case. After a few hours, Naruto lay awake in his tent, reflecting on his very first mission. Even though it was all behind him now, he still felt that something had to be done. He was still resentful even though it seemed that Takara and Masamori were both dead and that this might be sufficient to prevent the war. He was aware that many people had been killed or injured, which was inevitable in the end, but would there be more fighting and fatalities the following day or tomorrow? Would each side arrive hoping to exact some misguided revenge on the other? How about Kazuya and Kasumi? What would they all do now, their village? He left his tent and began to walk into the woods, still lost in thought. Baki inquired, "Where do you think you're going?" Naruto didn't even hesitate. Like the others, he had assumed Baki was asleep. "Gotta pee," was his response. After examining him, Baki turned away without saying anything more. The boy's gaze landed on the fire's dying embers as he left. Whether a Kyuubi container or not, a child's first experience with such a mission must have been somewhat traumatic. He had done well enough, though, and he would undoubtedly improve as a result. Even after the mission was completed, Baki still had to deal with the other issue the cage had given him. Though Baki knew better, he looked at Gaara, who seemed to be sleeping. During their altercation, he had only seen one potential opportunity, and he most likely could have taken it if he had so desired. However, he had frozen at the last second, realizing all too well the consequences of a mishap. It would have to be understood by the cage. He hadn't given it a direct order, after all. He heard Naruto creep back into his tent without making a sound. Disregarding his inner turmoil, the weary Junin closed his eyes once more and fell into a very light sleep, prepared to awaken at the first hint of trouble. The mining site, which still bore the scars of the recent deadly battle, was approached by a shadowy figure. The Kusanin's shattered remains were still all over the place. The air smelled of blood, and the once rocky ground had turned into a miniature desert. He wasn't here for the spectacle, even though it was a gory sight. He had little time and a lot of work to do. When Kazuya and Kasumi arrived at the location of the former gold mining field, it was mid-morning. It took them a few long seconds to realize that there were already a few Kusa shinobi present because they were so taken aback by the abrupt change in the scenery. As Kazuya quickly reached for his kodachi, the Kusa nin held up their arms in a peace sign. A young man named Yoshihide said, "Please wait," and approached them. "There's no reason for us to fight again." While Kazuya kept his hand on the hilt, Kasumi relaxed. The girl questioned, "What in the world happened here?" Yoshihide let out a distressed sigh. "That kid from Suna, the one with the big gourd and red hair, he did this. Turned the ground and rock into sand and crushed an entire regiment of our soldiers with it." The twins looked at him as if he were cracking a bad joke, but they couldn't help but nod when they saw the evidence. It was much harder to shock them again after Naruto's appearance the previous evening. Kasumi questioned, "But where are the bodies? Is that what you were doing here? Or were you digging for the gold?" Kazuya inquired, and his sister gave him a look. His head was scratched by the Kusa nin. He pointed to the far end of the field, where a number of long sticks were visible protruding from the sand, and said, "Well, we were planning to come here to bring the dead back to Kusa, but when we got here they were already buried. We'll probably still take them all back to Kusa so they can be buried properly," he said. "But, as for the gold, it seems that most of it is gone." "Gone?" exclaimed Kasumi in shock. Unconsciously, Kazuya's hand pulled his blade out. "Don't play games with us, I'm in no mood." Repositioning his hands in front of him, he took a step back. "No games, honest. I admit, we first got here about 2 hours ago, and when we saw the others already buried, we decided to start searching for it. We started where the workers had begun yesterday, but we didn't find anything. When we started moving outwards to where the sand ended, we found a little bit, but it seems that the majority of it was destroyed when that kid turned the ground into sand." "You mean it was all dissolved? That's a possibility, I guess. There's probably a fortune of powdered gold still here, but among all this sand," he gave a helpless shrug. Without showing his sorrow, Kazuya turned away and muttered a curse. Kasumi clung to optimism. "You said that you found some still intact though, right?" He let out a sigh. "Yeah, there's definitely still some left here. I can't even guess how much, though not nearly enough to bother fighting over again. Not worth losing more comrades." He crossed his fingers. "Oh, that reminds me. Halleck. Sama gave us a message to deliver to any aimed shinobi that we met." "Halleck? Sama?" asked Kasumi. He informed them, "Yeah, Takara. Sama died last night as well," which caused Kazuya to turn back to him in amazement. It was the same thing that happened to Halleck. Sama, but he died before we could get him back to Kusa. Since he had no immediate successors, as his closest associate, Halleck. Sama was put in charge until a more suitable candidate could be named. He's still bedridden from that strange attack yesterday, but he's awake and of sound mind. In any case, he wanted to offer AIM one more declaration of peace, without any tricks or deception this time. The twins exchanged a worried glance, and we're just supposed to believe that? "I guess I don't really expect you to, but Takara. Sama never had any intention of holding up to his end of the treaty before. Halleck was fearful that his greed would do more harm than good to the rest of us, but he couldn't risk going against the daimyo's orders, you know? But with him gone, perhaps you can convince Masamori-san to reconsider?" Kasumi turned to face her brother once more. "No need to tell them if they don't already know," was the obvious interpretation of his expression. "We will. See to it that Masamori-sama receives your message." Yoshihide said, "Thank you," and bowed to both of them. "I should get back to work. As a show of good faith, please tell the rest of your men that they're welcome to dig alongside us. There's no telling if there's much left, but we're willing to split the findings." With a heavy sigh, Kazuya started to move away. Then Kasumi said, "We will," and went after him. She lowered herself to match his pace and whispered, "Brother?" He chuckled. It was a shallow, unhumorous sound. "Even if the amateur hadn't stopped us, we still wouldn't have been able to do anything, would we? We might even have ended up dead along with all those Kusa nin." Though she didn't say anything, Kasumi still felt sorry for him. As they left the mining area, he continued, "Does this mean I should be grateful to that little bastard? I mean, he stopped us from doing something that we would have regretted farther down the road, but what did we actually get out of this?" Takara is dead," she replied. "He may not have died at our hands like we hoped, but his sins have been punished for. As for Masamori..." She stopped when Kazuya raised his arm in front of her. She started to ask him why, but she stopped when they both heard a low, pitched moan coming from close by. They walked to a big clump of brush at the base of a tree and shoved it aside after hearing it a second time. When the twins saw the sickly, almost motionless Masamori they had discovered, their eyes hardened. Kasumi asked out loud, his Kekkei Genkei is still active? Kazuya simply pulled out his Kodachi without replying. He paused as he mentioned it, looking at his sister as if he were trying to win her approval. Kasumi nodded, steeling herself, and Kazuya killed his former master with a single slash, making sure to infuse it with all of his remaining anger, hatred, and thoughts of retribution. The twins felt the weight of 10 years of repressed pain and rage lifted from their bodies as Masamori sagged silently. Kazuya stopped as he was about to resheath his blade and cut the Omegakure Hittei off from around his head. He passed the blade to his sister and saw her follow suit. Kasumi grinned, her eyes watering with relief. Let's go home, brother. Arc Epilogue. The 3 miles back to the village was a long one. The twins had a profoundly depressing aura. Even though they were happier than they had been since their village had been attacked, something wasn't quite right. They had killed Masamori, and Masamori had killed Takara. Their 10-year mission was, in a way, over. However, it was a rather meaningless victory because they had neither the gold to take home nor a means of restoring prosperity to their village. They heard a lot of noise coming from the town square as they entered the village. What's going on? Questioned Kasumi. Kazuya speculated, perhaps they've already heard about Takara's death. They walked more quickly out of curiosity until they came to the square's crowd. Kaz-chan. Kaz.kun. A woman's voice broke through the cries and applause of the audience. When Kasumi noticed the middle-aged woman shoving her way toward them, she said, Izumi.san. What's all this about? Izumi exclaimed, it's wonderful. She grabbed them both by the wrists and started dragging them through the crowd. Come look, come look. The twins, more bewildered than before, let the woman guide them to the middle of the boisterous group. Izumi.san. Can't you just tell us what's... Her words died in Kasumi's throat. There were at least 30 different-sized gold nuggets sitting on the stone road right in front of them. She and her brother both gazed at it, mouths agape, afraid that it would suddenly disappear if they even blinked or turned away. Izumi continued, I couldn't believe my eyes either. I just woke up this morning and was going to the store, when suddenly I find this pile of gold sitting right here in the middle of the street. Was this your doing, you two? Though neither responded, they were both mentally reaching the same conclusion. To someone like him, it was absurd to think so. Kazuya pivoted, gazing into the distance. Kazuya? With his long hair covering his smile, the former shinobi bowed his head. Once again, you surprised me, Uzumaki Naruto. As the group walked, with Baki at the back, Tamari leaning on Naruto for support, Kankuro using Karasu's partially repaired arm as a crutch, and Gaara far ahead, Tamari made an odd discovery. Naruto, didn't you wash yourself last night? The unexpected query left him speechless. Yeah, why? The mistress of the wind wrinkled her nose. You didn't do a very good job then. You still smell like blood, and you still have sand in your hair. Naruto chuckled uneasily. Gee. Guess I'll have to make a stop at the next lake we pass by, huh? Baki's eyes narrowed behind him. Had he really? Last night? He sighed and rolled his eyes. You will still die because of that rebellious personality, Uzumaki. Or, for that matter, of me. No kidding. Pointed out Kankuro. Would you do me the favor of staying downwind of me, midget? Shut up. You're just upset that I've gotten to see how ugly your real face is without all the cover. Up. But maybe this team needs someone like him around for the time being.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.